Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
Near this deep pit filled with corpses, Chen Ming did not see any place with artificial buildings. This should be just the corpse dumping site of Zhujiang, and there must be another place where they really do things. With Chen Ming's patient waiting, the spaceship soon dumped all the stored corpses into the deep pit. At this time, he suddenly noticed that only one cargo hold of the spaceship opened the cargo hold door and dumped a large number of corpses into the big pit, but the cargo ship had another cargo hold without any action. It seemed that there were no corpses in it. Chen Ming immediately moved the metal liquid to another position, moved it outside the cargo hold, and continued to wait. After leveling the cargo hold where the corpses were dumped, the spaceship started the engine again, turned around and flew to another place on the planet. After more than 10 minutes of travel, the spaceship arrived at its destination, a small hill. It was not too far from the deep pit, about 30 kilometers. And there was a hidden door under this hill. When the spaceship landed, the door opened immediately, revealing a passage leading deep underground. Although the passage was large enough to accommodate the spacecraft, it did not enter the passage directly, but waited in place. A few minutes later, a device came to the surface from deep underground along the track of the passage. Several sturdy mechanical arms extended from the device and docked with another cargo hold of the spacecraft that had not been opened and the bodies dumped just now. The spacecraft and the device made mechanical structural sounds at the same time, and the cargo hold was directly transferred to the device. The device then operated again, taking the cargo hold directly underground. The metal liquid that was originally attached to the cargo hold also entered the underground, falling rapidly along this inclined super-long passage elevator. After passing through a completely dark passage, Chen Ming's metal liquid finally felt the bright light. This allowed him to see clearly the white and tidy environment around him that did not match his impression of the left path. Those structures and designs were somewhat like the environment of a laboratory. And, at this time, a group of fully armed left path elements were standing on the platform at the end of the passage. After the cargo hold was slowly filled, the leader of the Zhujiang team commanded the men to open the cargo hold, and immediately asked several people to surround the cargo hold exit and pointed their guns inside. At the same time, he shouted at the inside of the cargo hold, "Get out!" Just as the leader of Zhujiang spoke, Chen Ming also saw the situation inside clearly at this time. The cargo hold was not filled with corpses, but living people. There were people of different ages and genders, and at first glance, no two people looked the same. All of them were ordinary people. They looked at the Zhujiang members outside with despair, fear, and anger in their eyes, but when facing the black muzzle of the gun, they could only choose to obey orders. Zhujiang was indeed doing part-time human trafficking. Chen Ming estimated that the space station in the sky was a transit station. The kidnapped people and the bodies of the experiments being conducted in the core area of the space station were all sent to this laboratory on the planet after being gathered. He felt a little pity for these people, but he couldn't go to save them directly now. His main purpose of coming here was to find clues about the connection between Zhujiang and the dimensional infection in Kayamo Star region. At least he would try to save people or do other things without affecting the completion of his own purpose. So while the Zhujiang molecules were sending these people to the laboratory, Chen Ming's metal liquid had already flowed from the cargo hold into the floor of the laboratory and began to penetrate into the laboratory. However, a familiar scene appeared again. Most of the places in this laboratory are protected by films made of silent alloys. These harima divides the laboratory into different areas like the space station. And there are countless secret surveillance in the passages that have not yet closed the door. Like the space station, there is no way to go in directly. But fortunately, the Zhujiang molecules are now sending these captured ordinary people to the laboratory. Chen Ming directly adhered to the metal liquid on the soles of the feet of these Zhujiang and these ordinary people according to the operation he had done before, and mixed into the interior of the laboratory. Soon he found that there were some auxiliary robots in the laboratory that were moving unrestricted in various areas divided by silent metal films. As long as he sneaks in, even if there are no left-wing elements and captured ordinary people, his metal liquid can completely use these robots to do things. It seems that the internal defense of this laboratory is not strict. However, Chen Ming has just sneaked into the laboratory and is not familiar with the terrain of the entire laboratory. The laboratory does not place a public map outside, so he can only rely on these robots to slowly explore and wander between different areas. In the process, the pure white walls between the neat passages in the entire laboratory gave Chen Ming a sense of familiarity. It was just like the laboratory where he personally went to Yuhui to study clones underground, but ended up with dimensional infection. Although most of the pure white of Yuhui's laboratory was covered with deformed flesh and blood, it can still be seen in its original state. The base of that laboratory is actually almost the same, but it is slightly different in design to adapt to Yuhui. Although everything seems normal here, if Zhuojing continues to mess things up, I'm afraid he will face the same ending in the future. Chen Ming is not thinking for Zhuojing. He is just worried that the dimensional infection that may happen again will lead to some worse situations. Not only the dimensional infection, but also the abnormal human tissue that makes him feel scalp numb without the protection of the spirit stone is definitely the result of an equally bad experiment. Judging from the broken bodies thrown into the deep pit, what Zhuojing made should be some kind of monster with entity, just like the deformed heart that Chen Ming once faced. So if these two are mixed and exploded together, the result may be catastrophic. Wait, Chen Ming suddenly realized something. Isn't Zhuojing studying this? They have already made dimensional infection, so it seems that it is not impossible to make something similar again. Of course, it is also possible that Zhuojing has made new progress in the research on dimensional infection, so that the result caused by dimensional infection can produce such a situation that makes people feel good. He was more inclined to the worse outcome, that is, the former. But no matter which one, as a person who experienced the dimensional infection, he could be sure that the consequences of both situations were equally fatal. Chen Ming felt that he had to solve this matter, not only because of the dimensional infection and the possible results of Zhuojing's new experiment, but also because the information of the ecological observation space station that was closely related to Zhuojing was originally left in the terminal of the Lieutenant General's illegitimate son. If Chen Ming did not interfere, this information could be discovered by others. At that time, someone would naturally come to investigate, confirm the situation, and hand over the task to the right person to handle. But in order to give Whooping a reason to intervene in the investigation of the Kamo Star region, he chose to conceal this information, come to investigate in person, and did not disclose this news to anyone. And at present, it seems that there is no sign of this space station being investigated, and even Minister Yi can come here with great fanfare. Chen Ming probably really did not interrogate the Lieutenant General's illegitimate son to get any information about this space station. This space station was hidden by him. If he does not deal with it, it may continue to exist for a long time. He was the source of this situation, so he must take responsibility for what he did and take responsibility for solving the troubles on this space station and this planet. Chen Ming still remembers what the president said 2 days ago. He now has the ability and responsibility to solve those dimensional infection incidents that may break out. The metal liquid is still going deeper into the space station. Chen Ming's luck was pretty good at this time. Shortly after entering the laboratory, the metal liquid found a monitoring room with only 2 people on duty among the chaos in various areas. There happened to be a map of the laboratory in this monitoring room. He can also distinguish the different actual environmental conditions of each area based on the content of the monitoring. He can even reproduce a 3-dimensional image of a laboratory in his mind. As Chen Ming really did this, he also noticed that the coverage of the monitoring actually had a large blind spot, located in the northernmost part of the laboratory, which is the farthest point from the southern entrance of the laboratory and the deepest part of the laboratory. According to the markings on the map, this area without monitoring coverage is called a closed experimental area. It can only be said that it is indeed closed. However, the laboratory control system that Chen Ming wanted to find the most was not there, nor was the main database, and even some small laboratories inside the laboratory were not there. There was no valuable information to tell Chen Ming what was there. But Chen Ming didn't need it now. Since this place was in the most secret corner of the laboratory, the secrets of the entire laboratory must be hidden here. The research results that could produce the kind of deformed tissue that made people feel good must be there. There was no other possibility. After figuring this out, Chen Ming suddenly sensed a potential danger from deep in the laboratory. This feeling was very obvious, not the kind of vague tingling feeling, but the extreme danger that really brought life and death crisis. Chen Ming had previously tested the difference between the danger perception ability of the prosthesis and the danger perception ability of the main body. It was found that there was no difference in effect, but the specific effect of the danger perception of the prosthesis was based on the standard of the prosthesis. If a pistol was pointed at Chen Ming's forehead, the sense of danger would be intense without Chen Ming resisting. But if this gun is pointed at Enwupiang's forehead, Chen Ming will not be able to sense any danger through Enwupiang. That is to say, the thing in the deepest part of this laboratory has the ability to kill Enwupiang's body. This is the object he must deal with, and he can't escape. However, Chen Ming is not in a hurry to go there for the time being. He doesn't want to face Zhuojing and the monster created by Zhuojing at the same time. His most important goal now is still this laboratory database. The database may store the content of Zhuojing's experiments, and it may allow him to figure out in advance what kind of experiments Zhuojing is doing. After getting the map in the monitoring room and the three-dimensional imaging of the laboratory, Chen Ming knew the approximate equipment layout and personnel distribution. He quietly diverted the metal liquid to different locations in the laboratory. One portion of the metal liquid followed a robot into the area where the computer room was located. Although it was impossible to enter the computer room directly, because the computer room was a sterile and dust-free environment, it would not be open under normal circumstances, and it was arranged in the center of the entire laboratory. There was a transparent compartment that separated the computer room, and the situation inside the computer room could be clearly seen from the outside. Dozens of server equipment were placed here. Not only were there a large number of surveillance cameras surrounding it, but there were also patrolling security nearby. Under normal circumstances, it was obviously impossible to invade here. But the left-handed defense could not prevent the metal liquid from the floor from directly penetrating into the equipment. The computer room was just a room inside this area, and it was not specially isolated by the silent alloy metal film. Chen Ming directly stuffed the metal liquid into the equipment in front of countless left-handed molecular floors in the entire laboratory and made these metal liquids into data readers, hacking into the database from a physical level. The whole process was just a little troublesome because he got lost in the middle, and the final invasion can be said to be very easy. The contents of the entire laboratory database were exposed in front of him as if it was defenseless. Chen Ming immediately began to look for Zhuojing's work arrangements for the Ecological Observation Space Station and the laboratory on the planet. Soon, he found the answer in the database. That Ecological Observation Space Station was really just an Ecological Observation Space Station until one day it was quietly infiltrated by Zhuojing. Chen Ming was not interested in the specific process of Zhuojing, so he immediately skipped a bunch of useless content and jumped to the key part. The situation of this space station was exactly the same as Chen Ming's previous guess. The space station is a transit station that helps Zhuojing gather those ordinary people kidnapped or lured by Zhuojing and conduct cloning-related experiments on the space station, intending to replicate the dimensional infection they have already carried out once. From these lines of content, it can be seen that Zhuojing has indeed understood the concept of dimensional infection. Even on the space station, it seems that the initial phenomenon of dimensional infection has appeared, that is, the clones have organ deformation and have their own vitality. And this time, according to the records of the database, the dimensional infection is the stomach. A clone's stomach was deformed, right on the space station, just a week before Chen Ming came. As for more detailed information, it was not recorded in the database. However, Chen Ming remembered that it seemed that Yu Hui's laboratory exploded within one day of the deformation. No, it seemed that it was only one night. The entire Yu Hui laboratory exploded and completely became the nest of the deformed heart. This Ecological Observation Space Station has not had any problems until today. Is this a bit too exaggerated? At this time, Chen Ming's mind flashed the silent alloy membranes that isolated the space station into different areas. Could it be that these things protected the space station and prevented the internal dimensional infection from leaking out? He couldn't say, but there was indeed such a possibility. Such a discovery made Chen Ming a little restless. He immediately controlled Enwupiang to get up from the bed in the dormitory and left the dormitory. When Uncle Mao asked Chen Ming where he was going, Chen Ming simply responded that he was going to the toilet and disappeared directly at the door of the room. He had to do something quickly. He couldn't continue to stay on a space station where the dimensional infection had actually broken out as if nothing had happened. He had to do something. Just as Chen Ming left the dormitory and walked towards another dormitory. In the database of the underground laboratory on the planet, he found the experiment being conducted in this laboratory, called the Mind-Beast Project. There was also no specific experimental data, only some rough introduction documents. The real core data should be in the places that were not covered by the internal monitoring. These introduction documents alone can only roughly show that this is a study in the direction of spiritual stone and human body. This mind beast should be the source of the deformed tissues that made him feel good. Moreover, this mind beast project is indeed involved in dimensional infection. Zhuojing really wants to study what will happen to people who are killed by the mind beast and experience dimensional infection again. This just explains what Chen Ming saw before. Those deformed corpses that made him feel inexplicable emotions should have been created by this mind beast, but they appeared on the space station and were transported back to the ground. In fact, it should be at the beginning that ordinary people were transported to the ground laboratory and carried out the mind beast experiment that Zhuojing was doing. The bodies of people who died in the experiment will be sent back to the space station for a second test. The bodies that had undergone the second experiment would be sent back to the planet again and dumped directly in the pit. However, looking at the abandoned bodies, it seemed that nothing had happened. Chen Ming remembered that after the dimensional infection broke out to a certain extent, it would affect all living things around, even corpses. But those who had undergone the mind beast experiment did not seem to be affected by the second time and remained in their original state. This may be what Zhuojing wants, the ability to remain unaffected after experiencing a dimensional infection. At this moment, Chen Ming thought of the possibility that Zhuojing may have actually experienced a dimensional infection and did not suffer from serious sequelae. I am afraid that Zhuojing's mind beast experiment has already produced results that can really be used. To be honest, Chen Ming is very interested in this research direction, and there will definitely be a lot of people in the Empire who are interested. However, Chen Ming believes that the behavior of directly using people for experiments is absolutely unacceptable. The experiments in this space station and the underground laboratory on the planet must be terminated. Chen Ming saved all these important data and continued to search in the database. Suddenly, Chen Ming found a database dedicated to recording communication data in the entire large database. And in this database, Chen Ming found a record of Zhuojing's laboratory involving Kamo Star region. The content of the communication was generally the sharing of the experimental progress of different types of mind beasts conducted by the two laboratories. With this clue, Chen Ming can even directly pull the clues that Whooping can grasp to Kamo Star region and reach the destination directly. Although the laboratory communicating with the Ecological Observation Space Station here is not in Kamo, 3 in Kamo Star region, but in other star regions, it is enough as long as it can reach Kamo Star region. And it seems that the situation in Kamo Star region is not optimistic. If there is really more than one laboratory conducting such dangerous research, then Kamo Star region may become a time bomb that will explode another dimension at any time. He must speed up the progress. At the same time, Chen Ming also found several important data in the database, which are about several special materials. The relevant contents of these materials are recorded in detail in the database, and their effect is to replace those materials that the Empire has now ordered to be controlled and can be used for cloning experiments. Now Chen Ming knows why the Empire has already controlled these key materials, but Zhuojing can still conduct large-scale cloning research and even cause a dimensional infection. Obviously, a suitable substitute has been found. After all, the Empire has ordered a ban on the research of cloning technology, and it is certainly difficult for a serious research institute to continue to find which materials can be used to replace cloning materials. Only Zhuojing can gain advantages in these aspects. But advantages can sometimes turn into disadvantages, just like now. Since Chen Ming already knows the types of these materials, as long as there are companies, enterprises, or individuals who purchase a large number of such substitutes, many of them may be involved with Zhuojing. This will definitely be a major blow to Zhuojing, as long as this news can be spread. As for the way to spread this news, it is too simple. Chen Ming directly picked up the terminal. After camouflaging the sound and positioning, he called the anti-cult bureau in the star field wherein Whooping is currently located. A female voice said on the other end of the phone, "Hello, this is the anti-cult bureau. How can I help you?" "I want to talk to someone who is important." "Sir, what do you mean?" "You should be checking my location now, but you can't find it. Even the means of the star-level government can't locate my location at all, so you should know that I am a capable person, and I also hope to talk to capable people. Please wait, sir." Soon, a deep and loud middle-aged man's voice replaced the previous female voice and said to Chen Ming, "Hello, sir. I am the deputy director of the anti-cult bureau here." Chen Ming checked and confirmed that this voice matched the deputy director on the local government's public website, and then responded, "Hello, I want to tell you something about Zhujiang." The deputy director didn't say much nonsense. Since Chen Ming was able to hide his identity under their noses, it is very likely that he really has something to say. It won't hurt to listen to it. Even if there is a problem, it can be regarded as a prank call. Please go ahead. "Do you know dimensional infection?" The words dimensional infection suddenly popped out of Chen Ming's mouth. The other end of the phone was wearing a pair of half-rimmed glasses. The expression of the deputy director of the local Star Territory Anti-Cult Bureau, who originally looked a little surprised, immediately changed, and he also subconsciously felt it in his heart. The ground was startled. He had just heard of this word, not long ago at a meeting where the government of the Auden Star Territory regularly reported on its work. Although it is a regular meeting to report on work, this meeting can be said to be held for this dimension of infection problem. Because some time ago, the propaganda about the recent outbreak of newborn deformities in the empire was an unknown infectious disease. As a government official, the deputy director has heard that the specific situation is more complicated and terrifying, but he is from the Anti-Cult Bureau, not the Population Bureau or the Medical and Health Bureau, so he doesn't care. At this meeting, the empire could be said to have completely clarified the concept of dimensional infection and confirmed that it was related to the wave of neonatal deformities. Moreover, the wave of deformed children caused by the last dimensional infection that he didn't even know was sealed up decades ago was also revealed at this meeting. This meeting even directly denied the excuse that the cloning ban was enacted because of ethical issues, making it clear that the cloning ban was because human cloning would lead to dimensional infection incidents. He noticed at the time that many officials who were older or had experienced long periods of dormancy were not surprised when they heard the news. Only someone like him, who was relatively young and had never slept, was a little shocked after learning the news. Since their star domain government made this matter explicit during the meeting, then this is definitely the Empire's instruction, and the attitude is very clear. We must find ways to solve this dimensional infection, prevent and kill it in its early stages. In addition to their star domain government holding such a meeting, other star domains will definitely take similar actions, which can be said to completely expose the dimensional infection. It won't be long before some gossip spreads throughout the empire. According to the meaning of this meeting, dimensional infection may be a state that the empire will maintain for a long time in the future. Therefore, the head of the government of their star field asked each department during the meeting that if signs of dimensional infection are really discovered, they need to contact the Psyker department to deal with it as soon as possible and cooperate with the confidentiality work. Just what was said in the meeting has left a deep impression on the deputy director's mind about the dimensional infection. And it was a few days after the last meeting. The leader also suddenly privately took the head of their psychic energy department, whom he had met several times, to the Anti-Cult Bureau. They met with him, the deputy director, and the director, and talked about the left path and dimensions. The infection thing. From that moment on, it was impossible for him to forget the concept of dimensional infection and the huge trouble caused by the left path. So at this moment, the deputy director directly covered the interface of the terminal used by the operator, waved his hand to the other people in the room and said, "Get out of here and tell people to seal this recording in my hand. Only me and director calls." The others immediately complied and left the room where the operator worked. The deputy director immediately released his mouthpiece and said to Chen Ming, "The rest of the gang are gone now, please speak. It seems that you should also know about dimensional infection, so I will tell you directly. Your Odin, Five-star sector, the Tall Galaxy, has an ecological observation space station here. A dimensional infection event broke out on this space station. In addition, this space station is closely related to Lud's left path. It is a small-scale dimensional infection caused by Zwapath's human cloning research on the space station. You should be able to find some interesting news. When the deputy director heard the name of this galaxy, he had already manually searched for it on the terminal. Soon he saw information about a space station that had been quiet, and he also happened to find information about Yi Lirong, the local director of the district-level culture and tourism department, going to the space station. This discovery made him a little surprised and silent, because he still somewhat believed what the stranger on the other end of the phone said. Originally, the deputy director could not directly confirm from Chen Ming's words that the dimensional infection had indeed occurred, but now Chen Ming has indeed shown a certain ability. He also accurately stated that the dimensional infection originated from human clones and was closely related to Zhuajing. These 2 points allowed him to basically choose to believe Chen Ming. Because of this, the deputy director felt a little uncomfortable after hearing that a minister from a lower-level government department was suspected of having contact with Zhuajing. It's not that Chen Ming made this point uncomfortable, but that he, the deputy director of the Anti-Cult Bureau, felt uncomfortable when he heard that a fellow official was related to a cult like Zhuajing. However, he did not directly clarify this point now, and just asked, "Is it confirmed that a dimensional infection has broken out?" What he saw in the database flashed through Chen Ming's mind. It is currently known that the infection target of the dimensional infection is the stomach of the clone, and the distortion occurred a week ago. This shows that the dimensional infection has already occurred a week ago, but since there is no large-scale distortion, it means that Zhuajia has indeed controlled the dimensional infection, and the dimensional infection has not actually broken out. It's not accurate to say it's an outbreak. There are only some early symptoms. Zhuajing has used some means to limit the dimensional infection. How did they do it? Do you mean Zhuajing created the dimensional infection, or did they limit the dimensional infection? Both. Chen Ming immediately told the information he got from the underground laboratory database. Regarding Zhuajing's dimensional infection, you should want to know how they made a large number of clones, right? This is because the cloning technology has new alternative materials that are not controlled by the Empire under Zhuajing's research. I can tell you the names of the materials now. You can take the names and ask the laboratories that have had cloning experiments before, asking them if they can make alternatives. But they are all new materials. It may take time for them to verify, and the results will not come out so quickly. It's okay, just tell me. I'm taking notes. Chen Ming glanced at the warehouse area of the underground laboratory. Here, some of his metal liquid also spread over, and he had found those materials in the warehouse area and obtained some samples, which could be left as evidence later. After reconfirming the contents of the database, Chen Ming told the deputy director the names of several materials. The deputy director immediately handed the paper with the materials to a person waiting outside the door. After briefly explaining the task to him, he returned to the room. "I have asked someone to verify it. Have you figured out how Zhuajing suppressed the dimensional infection? As far as I know, the dimensional infection outbreak is very strong. If it is in a densely populated place like a space station, one day is enough to destroy the entire space station. Indeed, under normal circumstances, one day is enough for the dimensional infection to break out, but Zhuajing has deployed a large number of isolation membranes made of silent alloy on this space station to block the spread of dimensional infection." Silent alloy? You don't need to know what this thing is for. You just need to tell people the term truthfully, and someone will understand. Your government should have psychics, right? Yes. When Chen Ming got this answer, he basically confirmed that there would be no problem after he said what he just said. However, after thinking about what Zhuajing was doing on the planet below in addition to the space station, he still spoke again. "We must send professionals who can fight and at least protect themselves." Zhuajing is not only doing cloning experiments and dimensional infection, they seem to be doing some other experiments on the planet below the space station. I can only roughly describe the specific effect. It is a deformed human tissue that makes people feel good for no reason without the protection of spiritual stones. Remember to explain my description to the psychic who is connected with you in full. When people come, Be careful not to let ordinary people get close to the space station and the planet. Such a detailed description does not sound like it is made up, and it certainly will not be stated that he can find someone to verify it directly. So after combining what Chen Ming said before, the deputy director has completely believed Chen Ming at this time. I know, if the news you said is true, this will be a very important contribution. You should also be a psychic, right? I would like to ask about your identity. We will not treat anyone who has made contributions to the empire unfairly. Chen Ming was still quite surprised to hear this, but he still let someone investigate in Wu Ping's identity, so he would not expose it directly. What others have investigated is definitely more believable than what he says. Anyway, he has already laid all the necessary groundwork for his identity. It doesn't matter. Anyway, your people will most likely know who I am when they come, so I won't waste my words. Also, in order to prevent Wu Jing from sneaking into your anti-cult bureau, I will make a call to the military in your star field in 2 hours. In another 3 hours, I will send this message to all the media I know. That's it. Goodbye. Wait a minute. The deputy director suddenly raised his voice and asked, "Why did you think of our anti-cult bureau first when you were involved in the dimensional infection incident? Why did he go to the anti-cult bureau?" Of course, it was because Chen Ming knew what the president was doing these days. After the president confirmed from him some time ago that Wu Jing had manually created and controlled the dimensional infection, he went to the department in the empire to deal with such things. Cooperate with him to announce the news of the dimensional infection among governments at different levels in the empire, and by the way, links Wu Jing and the dimensional infection together. The president did not hide these things from him, but kept communicating with him in real time. So in this case, the Anti-Cult Bureau, which is specifically targeting Wu Jing, must be the most important government department. The object of the work must be arranged. If the deputy director of the Anti-Cult Bureau does not know the connection between Wu Jing and dimensional infection, then the problem is even more serious than the space station being occupied by Wu Jing. Of course, the government's psychic department must be responsible for dealing with dimensional infection. No other department has the ability to deal with it. But Chen Ming does not have the phone number of the local psychic department. The main reason is that the empire has not announced the existence of psychics, and only people with a little status in the government and the military know about this psychic department. So they don't have a public phone number to call. Chen Ming was too lazy to find someone to check and ask. But since other government departments cannot handle it, this task will most likely fall on the psychic department in the end. Government departments must have communicated with each other. The government psychic department is also relatively independent and has a higher status than other departments. It is not so obvious that there is competition between them that they would conceal this information. Even if it was concealed, Chen Ming said that he would pass the news to others. Whether the government should take the risk to handle it and enjoy the credit alone, or just throw the matter out to others to deal with, that is the government's problem. Chen Ming naturally called the Anti-Cult Bureau in the end, which was about the same. Of course, no matter what, the responsibility of delaying the time when this space station was noticed, causing the initial outbreak of dimensional infection, and giving Wu Jing more time to study, all lies with Chen Ming himself. So solving Wu Jing and the trouble caused by Wu Jing is still his task. Even if Chen Ming has already told this matter, it will not change. It's just that the solution is solved, and what should be done with the space station and ordinary people on the space station is none of his business. There is dimensional infection on the space station, and he can only deal with the source of dimensional infection at most. As for what to do with those who have experienced the dimensional infection, how to deal with so many ordinary people, these two questions. Chen Ming doesn't have the time to first distinguish every civilian who is not disguised by Wu Jing from the Wu Jing space station, and then find and take care of those who are affected by the dimensional infection. If the dimensional infection has really broken out, it will be fatal to ordinary people. However, if the dimensional infection is only in the early stage, it will not be directly fatal to ordinary people, but it is too troublesome to distinguish. Chen Ming can only ensure that his next actions will not accidentally hurt civilians as much as possible, but it is impossible for Chen Ming to take care of all civilians. He is in Wu Ping now, not Chen Ming. And Wu Ping does not have the ability to protect so many civilians. Wait, it seems that there is. As long as he shows some of the Queen's abilities, he can rely on the Queen to produce a large number of fungal blankets and some body tissues derived from Zerg units to cover the entire space station and create the same effect as controlling everyone with metal liquid in the colony. It's just that Chen Ming's original idea was that he had no metal liquid, so he had no means to protect people on a large scale. So he would take the initiative to call people outside at this time. If the nearest colony around this star zone does not need to jump, it will take at least 5 hours to get there. For the government, the only ship with the ability to jump is the cruiser, but the cruiser is not so easy to dispatch. Even if the army gets the news, it is not likely to send a cruiser to the face immediately. Currently, only the 14th Legion in the Empire has the hyperspace channel jump system technology that Chen Ming has, so this is why Chen Ming gave the government 5 hours of leeway, and these 5 hours are enough for him to finish what he should do. But now that he suddenly realized that he had the Queen's fungal blanket, the situation is different. Should he use the Queen's fungal blanket to protect everyone's safety? Chen Ming did not think too long to get the answer. He is not a good person, at least not a good person. It is definitely not a wise behavior to use his trump card to save people who have nothing to do with him. And Chen Ming remembered that Bai Quan had actually hinted to him several times that his psychic power was too strong, which made many people in the Empire a little uneasy. His psychic power has the ability to control the afterglow and the mechanical race. As long as he wants and takes action, he will sooner or later be able to organize a force that can fight against the Empire. The Zerg of the Queen of Zerg is also too much in a sense. After Chen Ming's several optimizations, the Zerg will definitely pose a great threat to the Empire as long as it is given enough time to develop. This means that if Whooping exposes the psychic power of the Queen of Zerg, he may be treated the same as him. Chen Ming determined his answer and did not think about protecting civilians. At most, he would protect Uncle Mao and not consider others. Mr. Psychic? The voice of the deputy director on the phone that had not been hung up pulled Chen Ming back from his flying thoughts. Where were we just talking about? Why did you come to our anti-cult bureau in the first place? The words in Chen Ming's mind just now could not be said directly to the outside world. So Chen Ming made up a random excuse and said, "Because I like the anti-cult bureau, that's all." Chen Ming hung up the phone directly and stopped wasting time. At this time, all the valuable data in the database of the underground laboratory computer room had been obtained by Chen Ming. The metal liquid that was distributed on the other side had also reached the main control system of the laboratory. Chen Ming was able to hack into the laboratory system through a physical hacking device and bypassed all security, perfectly penetrating the entire laboratory. Except for the area to the north of the laboratory, which is an independent area, all the control systems of this area are inside this area. However, this area is connected to the laboratory. Now that Chen Ming has completely controlled the laboratory, it is only a very easy thing to infiltrate it. But Chen Ming did not decide to do so because the gate of this area was closed. All the visible gaps are filled with silent alloy isolation membranes arranged on the left diameter. If he enters rashly, something he doesn't want to see will happen. At least Whooping had to settle things on the space station and then deal with things on the ground on the planet. Anyway, his laboratory database on the ground has obtained enough clues, and he no longer needs to continue investigating clues on the space station. The investigation on the space station is just the icing on the cake, not necessary. Instead of wasting time investigating, it would be better to resolve the dimension infection situation as soon as possible. As for the clues that Whooping needs to obtain, as long as Whooping takes action on the space station, he will kill everyone who is related to the database. Then just add some clues that Chen Ming investigated in the ground laboratory that are related to the ground laboratory into the database and give them to Whooping. Pretending that Whooping had discovered information about a laboratory on the planet, he guided him to the ground. As long as the signal blockade of the space station is completed, no one in the laboratory will be aware of it when he comes to the ground. I've probably figured out the plan to execute next. Chen Ming didn't want to delay for too long. He had concealed the news about Zhuo Jing for a long time. Clones were being produced on the space station all the time. Once something went wrong on the space station, they would be completely finished. But there is one thing that needs to be thought about before actually taking action on the space station. Those are the civilians on the space station. Although Chen Ming has made it clear that he will not deliberately protect those people, it does not mean that he will completely ignore them. It's not just Chen Ming who doesn't like killing people casually, he also doesn't like people killing people casually. It's even more because his next actions are likely to cause problems with the security system of the entire space station. If the dimensional infection located in the center of the space station is leaked, there may be big problems. I'm afraid there won't be a single living person left on the space station. However, Chen Ming quickly thought of a solution, which was to rely on the special structure of the space station that is very easy to be dismantled. Soon after Chen Ming thought through all the problems, Deputy Manager Chang, who was sleeping inside the space station, suddenly felt a slight pain in his forehead. He scratched a few times in a daze, grabbed a few strands of hair, shook them off, and continued to fall into a deep sleep. The few hairs were carried by the metallic liquid and flowed to other places along the ground. A few minutes later, Xiao suddenly appeared on the edge of the outer area and entered the inner area. He was not blocked and successfully walked into the space station, walked into a toilet, and got these hairs with hair follicles. After using the queen's body tissue in the toilet to swallow the genes from the deputy director, Xiao gradually transformed into Deputy Manager Chang. After confirming in the bathroom mirror that there was nothing wrong, Chen Ming walked out of the bathroom with a new appearance. After identifying the direction, he walked towards Deputy Manager Chang's room. There was a guard at the door of Deputy Manager Chang's residence. When he saw Deputy Manager Chang walking towards the door, his face was full of astonishment. "Deputy Manager Chang, aren't you?" Chen Ming squinted at the security guard at the door with a cold face. "I don't know when I went out. Are you just doing it?" The two guards immediately lowered their heads and apologized. "I'm sorry." After staring at the two guards for a while, seeing their hands and feet shaking unnaturally, Chen Ming changed his gaze and said, "Forget it." He pressed his hand directly on the door and used his spiritual energy to control the door to open. Of course, it was still pretending that the door was opened with a keycard. "Keep guarding." Chen Ming turned around and confessed, closed the door, entered the bedroom, and quietly got rid of Deputy Manager Chang. Subsequently, the tentacles of the Queen of Insects proliferated in the room, and the body of Deputy Director Chang was swept into the tentacles and swallowed completely. After the body of Deputy Manager Chang was completely devoured by the Queen of Insects, Chen Ming did not go out directly in front of Deputy Manager Chang, but waited in the room for a while. He asked the Queen of Insects to eat the body not only to destroy the body, but also for another reason. After waiting for dozens of seconds, there was finally some movement from the Queen of Insects. It transmitted most of the memories extracted from the body of Deputy Manager Chang that it had just devoured to Chen Ming's brain. Extracting the memories of life from the brain of a living creature is also a natural ability of the species called Thorn Zerg, to which the Queen of Insects belongs. In the past, the effect of this ability was at most to allow the Queen of Insects to understand the use of some of the body tissues and organs of these creatures through memory after devouring some creatures, and at most could only obtain some vague memories. However, as Chen Ming made several deep repairs to the Queen of Insects, some basic abilities of the Thorn Zerg have been greatly enhanced. This, of course, includes the ability to obtain memories through devouring. However, because the Queen of Insects has never learned language well, even if she communicates with Chen Ming, she relies more on psychic power and synesthesia in consciousness, so she cannot fully screen many contents in Deputy Manager Chang's memory. As a result, a large number of Deputy Manager Chang's memories appeared in Chen Ming's mind in an instant, which were extremely detailed. Chen Ming could only screen the useful ones by himself. It's not too troublesome. Even if an ordinary person's life memory is completely stuffed into Chen Ming's brain, it is nothing to him as a psychic. After quickly screening out the useful memories, Chen Ming found that Deputy Manager Chang was the same as he knew before. He actually did not believe in Zhuijing. He was just using Zhuijing to make money. However, the work of the personnel department of this space station is mainly the management of space station personnel. The supervisor is responsible for the management of Zhuijing personnel, and the deputy supervisor can only be responsible for the management of non-Zhuijing personnel. The gap between a person who manages Zhuijing on the Zhuijing space station and a person who manages non-Zhuijing can be said to be a world of difference. So this deputy manager Chang can only be regarded as a marginal figure on the space station, not too important. However, his memory is still of some value. Because there is a memory about the transformation process of the space station, which can be compared with the basic blueprint of the space station found by Chen Ming from the database in the underground laboratory on the planet to figure out the general situation of the space station. In general, the space station is divided into 5 layers: the external personnel layer, the internal personnel layer, the core personnel layer, the isolation layer, and the experimental center. Chen Ming is in the external personnel layer. Deputy Manager Chang usually stays in the internal personnel layer. Of course, there is no clear partition between the internal personnel and the core personnel layer. Those who can stay in the internal personnel layer can generally enter the core personnel layer. The situation of the isolation layer and the experimental center further inside can be figured out by just looking at the names of these 2 areas. Chen Ming wants to solve the problems on the space station next, so this place must be visited. In addition to the valuable structure of the space station, there is another valuable memory in Deputy Manager Chang's memory. It is about the situation of Minister Yi Lirong, who just came to the space station during the day. From his memory, Chen Ming can know that Yi Lirong has actually been to this space station several times before Chen Ming came. Deputy Manager Chang is a member of the management team after all, and he is always among the reception staff. Every time Yi Lirong came, he could find the scene in his memory. When Yi Lirong came for the first time, he looked very nervous and left in a hurry after a few hours. When he came for the second time, his expression was obviously much more relaxed, and he was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he stayed for more than a day before leaving. When he came for the third time, Deputy Manager Chang happened to hear some news from other people. It seems that it was because Yi Lirong got the news that a large number of left-handed elements were arrested in the Chiun Star System industrial colony in the Suluan 6-star region of the Suluan Star region, that is, Chen Ming's colony. It just so happened that the left-handed on this ecological observation space station was connected with the left-handed on Chen Ming's colony. So he came to determine the situation on the space station as soon as possible and prepare to transfer as soon as possible if there is any problem. There is indeed a connection, and Chen Ming followed the clues from the colony all the way here. But in fact, after Yi Lirong and his team were nervous for a few days, they found that no one came to investigate this space station, and there was no clue that someone would come to investigate. Even after the results of Chen Ming's colony came out, and they were able to accept interviews, they still did not come to investigate them. So Yi Lirong and the others thought that the people in charge of the investigation did not find the connection between the space station and the colony, and they felt relieved. This time, they came here at the same time as Chen Ming just because the experiment on the space station seemed to have some results. It's a pity that Deputy Manager Chang's level is still too low. He only knows what experiments are being conducted on the space station, but he doesn't know the specific content of the experiments, let alone the progress of the experiments. Come to think of it, if Deputy Manager Chang really knew the content of the experiments being conducted on the space station, then he would basically not be able to stay on the space station. How could such a person who got together with Zhu Jing for money not care about his life? If he knew that the space station was doing something dangerous like dimensional infection, he would definitely try to escape immediately, so it was normal for him not to know. If he didn't know, then he didn't know. It's not a pity. Anyway, Chen Ming didn't expect to find any valuable information from him. It was good enough to determine the new structure of the space station after the transformation and the reason why Yi Lirong came here several times. And there was another more important information that Chen Ming also found from his memory. The place where Yi Lirong rested. That's it. Chen Ming finished exploring Deputy Manager Chang's memory and stuffed all the remaining garbage memories back to the Queen Worm. Maybe there were some valuable things in these garbage that he didn't notice. Keeping these memories didn't take up his memory, so it wasn't a big problem. Chen Ming took the computer in Deputy Manager Chang's room and walked out of the room. In the puzzled eyes of the 2 guards, he went to the monitoring room in the core personnel area. The 2 people in the monitoring room were also a little surprised and puzzled when they saw Deputy Manager Chang. But Deputy Manager Chang was a management after all, so his attitude towards Chen Ming, who was wearing Deputy Manager Chang's face, was just confused. Of course, Chen Ming did not give them any good face. He directly used the Queen's tentacles to pierce their hearts and killed them. If there may be a few ordinary people in the outer personnel layer of the space station, but there is no way that there are ordinary people who know nothing in the core personnel layer of this sludging space station. After destroying the bodies, Chen Ming went to an equipment room in the core personnel layer where the observation equipment of the Ecological Observation Space Station was placed. At the same time, this is also the room where a subcontrol console that controls the outer area partition device of the space station is located. As for the main control console in the experimental center, that device can directly separate all parts of the space station outside the isolation area. And this subdevice here can only separate the outer personnel layer of the space station. Of course, this is enough for Chen Ming's current requirements. Chen Ming quickly stood in front of the door of the equipment room. When he was in the monitoring room before, he could clearly see that there were only 2 people on duty here. So now he just pushed the door and walked in, and instantly killed the 2 Zwudging members on duty. After connecting Deputy Manager Chang's computer to the area partition subcontrol console, Chen Ming set a time start trigger program for this thing. As long as the time is up, or he presses the button in advance, the subconsole will start, and the effect will be obvious. After doing all this, Chen Ming left the equipment room again. The layout of the periphery has been completed so far. There is only one thing left to do next. Chen Ming's eyes looked at the interior of the space station. 10 minutes later, when Chen Ming came to the closed door of the isolation layer, he was suddenly stopped by someone. Deputy Manager Chong, what do you want to do in the middle of the night? Chen Ming stood in front of the door motionless and did not answer. Because there was no one in his sight, the source of the voice was behind him, and it was a person who suddenly appeared without any warning. This can explain one thing, that is, the person who came is a psychic. It seems that it is impossible to go in directly. Chen Ming did not hesitate to directly start the signal blocking device he had modified using the equipment of the Distress Signal Management Office. Completely cut off the possibility of communication between the space station and the outside world. Then he turned around with a stern face and walked towards the psychic who had just appeared expressionlessly. The psychic frowned and did not move and asked Chen Ming again, "What do you want to do?" Although he was a little wary of Chen Ming, who was staring at Deputy Manager Chang's face, he could not be wary of an ordinary person. Even when Chen Ming walked in front of him, he did not react at all. He was confident that he could subdue Deputy Manager Chong, an ordinary person, with just a flick of his finger. Until the moment when Chen Ming's right hand waved slightly, his expression finally changed. At this moment, he felt the threat of death, and his face was full of fear. But it was too late. Being so close to Chen Ming, no non-physical enhanced psychic could react to his movements. I saw his right arm swinging with a shocking sonic boom in an explosive movement and punched the face of the psychic in front of him with terrifying speed and power. The whole head exploded instantly. The headless body flew backwards under the force of Chen Ming's punch. Accompanied by the blood spraying like a fountain, it hit the wall of the space station. The corpse twitched a few times and stopped moving. Chen Ming suddenly fell silent as he looked at the damage caused by his fist. He knew that the beast in Whooping's body, which he had spent a lot of time to create, had terrifying power. But he had never expected that even if he hadn't released the beast in his body, the prosthesis of Whooping alone could achieve this effect. Chen Ming didn't continue to be stunned by the better-than-expected effect and quickly searched the corpse. However, apart from some useless medicines, Chen Ming couldn't find anything valuable, including anything to prove his identity. Chen Ming didn't even know his name, nor did he know what abilities he had. Even the awakening nerves in the brain were completely shattered by the punch just now. At this moment, Chen Ming could only sense some weak spiritual energy fluctuations from the rotten flesh on his body and the blood flowers bursting on the surrounding walls. Wait a minute. Chen Ming suddenly thought of a possibility. He raised his hand and let the queen worm's tentacles spread again, covering the entire unmanned passage. As the queen worm devoured the corpse and all the body tissues that were shattered by Chen Ming's punch. As expected, there was a sense of satisfaction from the queen worm. It ate the awakening nerves whose spiritual energy fluctuations had not completely dissipated, causing its own spiritual energy fluctuations to increase slightly. Although it was not obvious, It was obviously the same as Chen Ming's previous situation. It was simply not digested completely. When it was digested, the gains brought by absorbing the awakening nerves would naturally appear. It seems that the awakening nerves will have another place to go in the future. The tentacles growing on the wrist gradually faded. Just as Chen Ming was about to continue walking into the space station, something suddenly fell out of the queen worm's tentacles and landed on the ground. This is a stone that is full of dark, twisted patterns, like the stiff limbs of a dying person, and is as big as the tip of a little finger and filled with spiritual energy fluctuations. Spiritual stone. Chen Ming immediately picked up the stone despite the slight tingling sensation brought by the spiritual stone and the slight fluctuations in his emotions. According to the touch Chen Ming personally felt at this time, the characteristic of this spiritual stone should be fear, which is consistent with the characteristics of the pattern on the stone. But it seems a little wrong. Chen Ming can be sure that he did not find this thing when he touched the corpse just now. With his current spiritual power, it is impossible for him to not feel this thing when facing the corpse of a psychic. Even if this spiritual stone is hidden in the body of the corpse, he can't have no perception at all, and he has to wait until the queen eats the corpse and spits it out before he finds it. Then the question is, where did this spiritual stone come from? Chen Ming frowned and recalled carefully just now. He suddenly found that the size and shape of this stone seemed to be exactly the same as the yellow gem on the necklace worn by the psychic. It seems that this spiritual stone was transformed from this gem, but the material has become the most common stone, and these patterns are painted on it. After discovering this, Chen Ming recalled an earlier incident again. It was some words that the boss told him when he talked about the spiritual stone with his boss. The boss said that any strong emotional fluctuations may lead to the birth of spiritual stones. Because everyone actually has a certain spirituality like psychics, it's just a matter of how much. This part of human spirituality will fluctuate violently with the emergence of extreme emotions. When a person dies during this violent emotional fluctuation, this emotional fluctuation that reaches the extreme will infect the surrounding objects. Usually, the most likely thing to be infected is stone, so spiritual stones are called spiritual stones. At that time, Chen Ming also asked a question, that is, whether psychics can manually make spiritual stones. The boss didn't say it at first, but when Chen Ming's psychic power was much stronger than before, the boss made it clear to him. That is, the spirituality of the psychic is controlled by the psychic himself. Without the natural spirituality amplified by extreme emotions and natural conditions, it is impossible to create spiritual stones. There are some things that the boss didn't make clear to him before, but he is clear now. That is, when a psychic dies in extreme emotions, it is easier for him to infect the surrounding stones into spiritual stones than ordinary people. And the source of this spiritual stone is naturally the fear before death. No wonder when Chen Ming picked up this fear spiritual stone just now, there was a little more resistance from the spiritual stone compared to the first time he touched the whispering spiritual stone. This is what the psychic left in the spiritual stone at the moment of his death. If Chen Ming guessed correctly, if this spiritual stone was touched by other people, then other people would be able to see a fantasy from this spiritual stone, a fantasy of killing and whooping. Just like when Chen Ming saw the fantasy of killing Shen Yi brought to him by the whispering spiritual stone. As long as this goal can be achieved, the emotions hidden in this spiritual stone that cause resonance will completely dissipate, and this thing will become a resonant spiritual stone. Chen Ming suddenly had a magical idea in his mind, but he couldn't do it for the time being. He put away the fierce spiritual stone directly and prepared to go deeper into the space station. He just killed a psychic in front of the gate separating the two areas. Although he was killed outside the isolation area, there is no need to worry about the monitoring problem, because the inside and outside of the entire space station are completely isolated. But the sonic boom of his punch just now is likely to attract some people. Anyway, the traces and corpses have been dealt with. As long as he leaves here, there is generally no problem. Chen Ming transformed himself into the appearance of the psychic just now, plugged a device that Chen Ming himself didn't know what it was used for into the control panel of the gate, and then directly used psychic power to open the blocked gate. Behind the gate is a small room with nothing, only 4 corners of the room, each with a monitoring device activated. Chen Ming was about to step in, but suddenly stopped again. He just moved his right foot slightly forward into the room, then released some metal liquid under his feet, and then closed the door again. Chen Ming's expression relaxed a little, because he found that even if he was in a room completely isolated by the silent alloy protective film, these silent alloys could not prevent his psychic power from penetrating and controlling the metal liquid in the room. It was as if his psychic power did not directly control the things affected by his psychic power through the normal cosmic environment, but through a more peculiar way. This was normal. After all, Chen Ming still didn't understand how his psychic power could transport materials across hundreds or thousands of light years. His psychic power might also use similar means when controlling, so it would not be blocked by this silent alloy room. Then Chen Ming was relieved. He stepped directly into the isolation layer. The structure of the isolation layer is slightly different from that of the outer space station. It is a special structure composed of multiple silent alloy compartments, which wrap the internal experimental center irregularly layer by layer. There are surveillance cameras leading to the interior of each room, and Chen Ming's every move at this time must be under the observation of these surveillance cameras. But it seems that no one has any reaction. Even if Chen Ming is now disguised as the psychic, he should not go into the isolation layer at this time. But the experimental center seems to have no action. No alarm, no announcement, no response. And as Chen Ming walked deeper, he could feel a chill from deeper into the space station. Something is wrong, and something seems to have happened inside. After realizing this, Chen Ming immediately sped up his actions and kept opening the doors of the isolation layer compartments, until he reached the last closed door leading to the experimental center. Chen Ming's movements finally slowed down. He had connected a device to the control panel next to the door, but he did not open the door directly at this time. Instead, he paused for a while, adjusted his state, and then opened the door. At the moment the door opened, what came into view were those researchers, or former researchers. Now their entire bodies were folded backwards from the position of the stomach as if they were broken, and their abdomens were violently torn, revealing the corpses of the stomachs that had been completely deformed. It was not quite accurate to call them corpses, because they were still moving. Their lower limbs were moving under the control of these deformed tails, and the upper half of the body was dragged on the ground as if controlled by the stomach. In addition, the upper bodies of some researchers who seemed to be seriously infected by the dimension had completely lost their human appearance and turned into a string of rumens that seemed to be dragged outside. In the process of moving, pools of unknown liquid were left behind. The hall of the entire experimental center was full of these creatures, all of which were these deformed stomach monsters made of stomachs. Along with these deformed stomach monsters, the flesh and blood tissues that covered the entire environment as before were brought into view. This weird and distorted feeling made Chen Ming very familiar. At the same time, his stomach was also a little churning. This was proof of the dimensional infection erosion, and Whooping's body had been marked by the dimensional infection. However, this familiar feeling was immediately suppressed by Chen Ming, but he still felt a little inexplicable nostalgia in his heart. Of course, Chen Ming quickly threw this feeling out of his head. He didn't want to miss the dimensional infection. It was just because the previous incident was too impressive that he subconsciously recalled it. Chen Ming took a deep breath and ignored the disgusting smell of stomach acid and those half-digested things. While the distorted tissue in the hall spread to the compartment where he had just opened the door, he also stepped directly into the hall of the experimental center. The distorted stomach monsters that were originally at a loss seemed to have found their target instantly. One by one, they aimed their deformed stomachs in the direction of Chen Ming. A gaze from deeper inside seemed to be annotated on Chen Ming. Chen Ming was not afraid at all. He clenched his fists and continued to step into the experimental center. In the past, he might have to use all his skills when facing these things. But now he doesn't need to consider whether there is any or not. Chen Ming's body leaned forward slightly, and his muscle tissue was fully tense. As these deformed stomach monsters vomited disgusting liquid in his direction, Chen Ming disappeared on the spot. The power given to him by the prosthetic and Whooping made him appear in front of a stomach monster in an instant. He smashed it in half with one punch. Prev is identical to table of contents. Google next. About us contact us DMA cookie policy privacy policy terms of use. The extreme violence brought by pure physical strength allowed Chen Ming to easily slaughter these twisted monsters. For a moment, only scattered flesh and splashing body fluids were left in the entrance hall of the experimental center. These body fluids were not the gastric acid that Chen Ming had guessed at the beginning, but a kind of viscous liquid. After being contaminated, the feeling of stomach cramps will be slightly aggravated. These body fluids are liquids that spread dimensional infection. For ordinary people, a little contamination will definitely kill them. However, for Chen Ming, the strength of these things is not up to standard, and it is not even as great as the pressure brought to him by the heavy heartbeat when he was close to the deformed heart. Moreover, the viscosity of these liquids themselves is not enough to affect the movement of Chen Ming's prosthesis. Except for being a little disgusting when sticking to his body, there is almost no effect. Even though his whole body was stained with the blood and body fluids of the deformed stomach monster, Chen Ming could still easily punch the deformed stomach monster into minced meat. The power brought by this body made Chen Ming a little bit unable to stop. Because this kind of refreshing punch-to-flesh feeling is something that Chen Ming's original body cannot do, he is a little addicted to it. When Chen Ming pulled himself out of this feeling, there was no independent individual who could still move in the entrance hall. There were only a bunch of exploding flesh and blood tissues, and the deformed flesh and blood covering the surrounding walls. Chen Ming cleaned up the various things on his body and then looked around. It can be seen that the severity of the infection near the gate of the experimental center is similar to that of Yuhui's underground laboratory, but it is slightly lighter. It should be that the dimensional infection has completely broken out a few hours ago. But it has been several hours, and it seems that no one outside the space station knows about this. Even the psychic who came to stop him just now seemed to have no idea what happened in the experimental center. Otherwise, he would never have run to the gate to block people. Either go in first for emergency or run away directly. There is no other choice. So what happened in this experimental center? Why didn't the outside receive information about the internal accident? Chen Ming himself had just blocked the external communication of the space station a few minutes ago. Why was there no internal information coming out earlier? We may have to go in to find out what happened specifically. Chen Ming looked deeper into the experimental center and suddenly took out a remote control and pressed it. The surrounding environment suddenly began to vibrate violently, and the source of the vibration came from all directions. This is the outermost part of the space station, the sound of the space station structure of the external personnel layer being separated. Chen Ming had seen the structure of the external personnel layer before. There are life support equipment and power generation equipment in the external personnel layer. Even if it is separated, it will not mean that the people on it will die. Therefore, separating the external personnel layer where ordinary people are concentrated from the space station itself is definitely the safest way of protection for ordinary people. As for what will happen outside after Chen Ming takes this action, it is none of his business. Anyway, he locked every door he hacked into when he came in. Even if the people outside finally realized that something was wrong and found that they could not contact the internal personnel, they chose to break through the door violently, and there was enough time for him to deal with the internal affairs. Chen Ming threw away the useless remote control and completely sealed the last door of the compartment he had just entered, to prevent the flesh and blood infected by the dimension from leaking out when he walked in. After confirming that the door behind him was sealed, Chen Ming continued to go deeper into the experimental center. At present, although there is a problem with the experimental center at the innermost part of the space station, there is no problem outside. Those irregular partitioned rooms have indeed successfully prevented the dimensional infection from leaking out. This is also the only good news on the space station at present. When walking on the road, Chen Ming kept thinking about a question in his mind. Why didn't Zhuijing replicate the structure of the partition layer inside? His eyes swept the interior of the first room after he passed through the hall. It was as empty as the entrance hall. The isolation layer obviously has a complex protective structure, but the interior of the isolation layer has a very loose design. There are many places in the interior of the experimental center that have a lot of space that is placed there for no reason. It is completely possible to put a partition in such a place without affecting the original function of this area. But Zhuijing didn't do it, and Chen Ming couldn't help but understand it. Logically speaking, the designer of the space station should know more than him. But now he can't understand the structural design of the space station's experimental center. It's normal if the left-handed elements at the bottom don't care about their own lives. But the management of the left-handed elements, and some of them, are not all crazy people who really believe in the left-handed doctrine. Otherwise, there would be no need for this space station to build an isolation layer outside the experimental center. There is an obvious conflict between the lack of protection inside the experimental center and the strict protection they have done in the isolation layer. There must be something wrong here. But now that everyone is dead, there is actually no big point in bringing it up again. Chen Ming just didn't think it through and paid attention to it for a while. Soon his attention was attracted by the hundreds of abnormal stomach monsters he encountered along the way. While massacring these twisted monsters, he came to a fork in the only road to the experimental center. There is a sign above the head here. Although it was covered with spreading flesh and blood, the words below could still be barely seen clearly. One side is the accommodation area, and the other side is the real experimental area. Chen Ming walked straight to the experimental area without thinking. Anyway, he would go there when he could come back from the other side, so there was no rush. This section of the road didn't have as many things going on as before. All the aberrant stomach monsters had disappeared, and no one came to stop his actions. It was as if the source of the dimensional infection had given up targeting him. Chen Ming arrived at the experimental area very smoothly, and to his surprise, he directly saw the core of the dimensional infection. It was a giant cage made of 3 layers of different composite materials. The innermost layer is made of a special grade material like ice steel, which is considered to be above average in strength. An extremely thin layer of molten silent alloy was poured into the gap between the middle layers. The outer layer uses a well-understood psychic wave restraining material. These 3 materials all have one characteristic, that is, they all appear to be transparent, and the inside of the cage can be clearly seen. Of course, there is no need to see inside now, because this cage is now broken. There was a slight damage to the structure on one side of the cage, and the molten silence alloy flowed out and cooled on the ground to form a metal plate not covered with flesh and blood. All the distorted flesh and blood caused by the internal dimensional infection have been squeezed out from this damage, swallowing most of the cage into the deformed stomach that has completely released itself. The whole cage seemed like a dinner plate for this huge cystic stomach. At the top and side of the huge, deformed stomach in the center of the experimental area, there were nearly 100 esophagus-like flesh and blood tissues extending along the ceiling. It extends all the way to the surrounding left-wing elements and researchers who have been completely eroded by the dimensional infection and have completely lost their human form. Only a large mass of flesh and blood is left to worship the rumen-like top of the left path elements and researchers, drawing nutrients from them. From the location of the flesh and rumen, it is easy to see that these people were infected almost at the same time and without any warning or precautions. He died immediately and became a victim of dimensional infection. Chen Ming honestly couldn't understand it. Irregular compartments on the outside protect the protective layer tightly. Why is there no protection on the inside? Before, he was still wondering why Zhuijing had been suffering from a dimensional infection for so long, but nothing happened. Now it seemed that it was just pure luck that he could barely survive the past few days. The result is that if you are not careful, everyone will die. Forget it, whatever. He's not here to replace Zhuijing. His goal is just to destroy the source of dimensional infection. Chen Ming raised his right hand, and magnificent plasma hovered in his palm. The deformed stomach seemed to feel threatened and kept squirming. The surrounding rumens gradually began to dry up, and the remaining esophagus at the top of the central distorted stomach seemed to be about to spit out something. Chen Ming's movements suddenly slowed down, because this deformed stomach was different from the deformed heart he had seen before. The aberrant heart already had self-awareness and the ability to communicate. It's just that Chen Ming had no intention of communicating with the aberrant heart and killed it directly. Today's deformed stomach seems to be unable to communicate, and it only has a basic sense of survival. So in a practical sense, This aberrant stomach should be less developed than the aberrant heart and should also be weaker. Chen Ming suddenly stopped condensing plasma and even extinguished the originally condensed plasma. He fixed his gaze on the huge, cystic stomach, bent slightly and leaned forward, assuming a posture most suitable for exerting force. The muscles all over his body were tensing, accumulating power from his own body and the psychic energy of the insect queen. The roar of the sonic boom produced heavy echoes in the experimental area. Chen Ming's body broke through the speed of sound with the help of terrifying explosive power. The air around him condensed into water droplets due to his high-speed movement, forming a cone-shaped sonic boom cloud the size of a person behind him. He raised his iron fist with all his strength and punched the center of the giant deformed stomach. The abnormal stomach was torn apart by the huge force, and Chen Ming's entire body passed through it, leaving a gap the size of a person in the center of the abnormal stomach's body. However, the damage caused by Chen Ming is far more than meets the eye. Starting from the location where his punch hit just now, the size of the gap continues to expand. All the flesh and blood tissue of the aberrant stomach was torn apart by that force and its aftermath. Only a few pieces of minced meat were left, barely maintaining its shape, and it was desperately extracting nutrients stored in the surrounding rumen in an attempt to restore the damage caused by Chen Ming's punch. However, its flesh and blood had been killed by the power of this punch, and all the nutrients seemed to be fed to a starved corpse without any effect. After trying in vain for a while, Abnormal Stomach finally realized this. It desperately released the dying, frenzied psychic fluctuations, desperately trying to use these psychic fluctuations to influence Chen Ming. But it was obviously in vain. The psychic fluctuations belonging to the dimensional infection gradually dissipated in the experimental center. There were only twisted and gradually shriveled flesh and blood left here. Chen Ming, who had already lost the terrifying speed on his body and stood steadily on the ground, wiped off his face and wiped off all the blood and various sticky liquids. He turned his head and looked at the record he had created with just one punch. After confirming that the individual infected by the dimension had completely died and the psychic fluctuations had begun to gradually dissipate, he stared at his fist silently for a long time. His heart was filled with a pleasure of wantonly venting power. This kind of oppression of the strong on the weak, this one-sided slaughter of the dimensional infection, made him feel nervous and excited. He had never experienced such a feeling before, and today was the first time. Chen Ming suddenly shook his head and pulled himself out of this feeling that was somewhat addicted to it. He didn't want to indulge in this feeling. He didn't want to bully and oppress the weak at will. His psychic power was not used in such places. Chen Ming adjusted his mentality and was no longer troubled by the power from technology and the queen of insects. He needed to wait for a while until the psychic fluctuations of the dimensional infection completely dissipated, and then go outside to deal with the remaining troubles. It took a total of 16 minutes and 37 seconds from the time he called the Anti-Cult Bureau to the time he entered the experimental center and killed the source of the dimensional infection. There was still plenty of time. Dimensional infection is just like this? This thought suddenly flashed through Chen Ming's mind. But it was immediately suppressed by Chen Ming, who had suppressed the desire for destruction in his heart. This is just a small area of the space station, and the dimensional infection has just broken out not long ago. The number of objects that can be infected can be said to be very rare, even less than the number of clones in Yuhui laboratory at the time. And if you think about it earlier, the dimensional infection of the eyeballs that the president experienced at the time can fully affect the entire prosperous star field. The boss said before that the president had banished all the dimensional infections in the entire galaxy. Even the president who was suspected of having spatial abilities could only banish them, but could not completely eliminate them. If the dimensional infection really developed, it would be unknown whether Chen Ming could win. Moreover, although he did not feel the threat on the space station, his psychic power could definitely sense the danger in the laboratory on the planet below. Things were not over yet, and he must not be careless. Just as Chen Ming was warning himself, a phantom that was turning from virtual to real suddenly reappeared on his chest. It was the ship spirit. Question mark. How did you get here? Chen Ming said, grabbing the guy that was coming out of his chest and pulling it out. The excitement, greed, and desire of the ship's spirit were transmitted at the moment Chen Ming grabbed it. Just like when Chen Ming faced the distorted heart, the ship's spirit behaved exactly the same as before. It was craving the corpse of the dimensional infected body. Faced with the boat's spirit staring at him pitifully, Chen Ming had no choice but to point to the entity next to him and said, "It's right there. Go by yourself." The boat's spirit transmitted the emotions of a leaping sparrow, circled Chen Ming twice, and then flew to the body of the deformed stomach. Soon, it flew back to Chen Ming with a blood-colored amber-like object, just like before. And in this amber, there was a miniature deformed stomach. At the top of the stomach, where the esophagus entrance was located, was the same dark crack that Chen Ming had seen on the crack of the miniature deformed heart in another amber. Chen Ming did not try to see what was in this crack, but just waited for the boat spirit's subsequent actions. As before, the boat spirit drilled into this blood-colored amber. The deformed stomach in the amber was affected by the phantom of the boat spirit in an instant, losing its original simulated biomass, melting into a pool of blood that oozed out of the amber and fell to the ground and rotted instantly. The blood color was gradually wiped off, and the whole amber gradually became clear, mixed with the luster of the starry sky. Unlike the last time, this time the amber did not contain the iron ore, but the highest point. That is, the ship where Chen Ming's ship spirit stayed the longest after changing ships. This amber with the highest point is also a source of condensed spiritual energy. After leaving this thing behind, the ship's spirit drilled back into Chen Ming's body. It instantly disappeared in Chen Ming's fake body of Whooping, and then appeared beside Chen Ming's original body. The ship's spirit seemed to really have a part of his spiritual energy. Chen Ming shook his head and continued to focus on Whooping. Although the dimensional infection has been dealt with, he still needs to wait for the spiritual energy fluctuations to completely dissipate before leaving to deal with other things. In case the individual infected by the dimension is just pretending to die, or is not dead. But he can't just sit there and wait and waste time. This experimental center is a place independent of the outside world, and there are monitoring and databases here. Chen Ming took some time to find the monitoring room covered in blood and flesh in the corner of the experimental center. The equipment here was not damaged, and Chen Ming easily retrieved the monitoring data. Then he found the video of the moment when the dimensional infection broke out completely. Just a few hours ago, some researchers were observing the deformed stomach with their naked eyes near the huge cage that was still intact. It looked very ordinary and common, as if observing this stomach was part of their daily work. But the situation soon changed. A left-handed member wearing a cleaning uniform shouted, "God," and merged into one, and rushed to the cage with a bomb that came from nowhere and exploded. The violent shock wave swept the entire area. Although only a few of the researchers around were injured, they did not die. But the impact of the explosion did destroy the outermost layer of psychic wave restraint material and let the molten silent alloy inside flow out. Then, there was nothing else. Without the dual protection of the silent alloy and the restraint material, no matter how hard the innermost layer of ice steel was, it could not block the psychic wave. In an instant, the stomachs of all the researchers in the laboratory were rejuvenated as never before. It formed the appearance that Chen Ming saw when he came. When seeing the behavior of Jing, Chen Ming did not understand why Jing did not set up an isolation layer inside the space station. On the contrary, he could understand Jing very well. Because Chen Ming knew that the high-level officials of Jing were talking to the lower-level officials about creating a false god. In the previous propaganda, they also linked the god with the existence of another dimension that caused the dimensional infection. Chen Ming was sure that the high-level officials of Jing really wanted to study the dimensional infection and regarded the dimensional infection as a strategic weapon to threaten the empire. At the same time, they were also studying the Mind Beast project as a trump card to protect themselves. But those at the bottom did not hear these. The lower levels Jing only heard the high-level officials say that this was part of God, and they believed it and really listened to it. In their eyes, this deformed stomach was part of God. If there was a chance to merge with the legendary God, the answer to what a crazy cult member would do was very clear. It was just that Chen Ming didn't know how he regarded a deformed stomach as God. Although Chen Ming now recalled carefully, he found that although this stomach was deformed and ugly in appearance, full of disgusting flesh and blood, from a biological point of view, it did show the unique beauty of a human organ function. The deformed heart last time was similar. Although it was deformed and had various hyperplastic flesh and blood tissues, the beating myocardial tissue was indeed full of a kind of beauty of vitality of the source of life force. This beauty is a bit unique, and ordinary people can never appreciate it. After all, they will die after just one look. However, Chen Ming, who has experienced a lot, can really appreciate it. But this beauty has nothing to do with the god of the cults Wujing. Chen Ming still can't understand how Wujing members regard a stomach as a god. Forget it, it's not important. Knowing what the madman is thinking, he is also a madman. Chen Ming deleted most of the content about him in the surveillance video, leaving only some that can be released. Then he left the monitoring room and found the database of the experimental center. It stores files about dimension infection experiments. Chen Ming couldn't quite understand these documents. There were a lot of professional terms in them, so professional that he must have studied them systematically. It was hard for Chen Ming not to wonder who was behind Wujing to support them in the cloning experiment. Of course, this problem was not something Chen Ming needed to worry about. It was better to leave it to the empire, the government, and the army. However, there was another document that he could understand, and it also relieved his doubts. The document on the transformation plan inside the space station. In the isolation layer of the space station, the structure of the experimental center was not like this at the beginning, but was transformed into this in the recent period. According to the content of the document, a leader of Wujing who had direct contact with this space station requested the removal of many things in order to facilitate subsequent experiments in the space station. The experiment you want to make convenient is probably not a dimension infection leak experiment. Chen Ming complained and saved another copy of the transformation document. At first, he was still wondering why there seemed to be no safety measures in the experimental center, but now he was sure that there were indeed no safety measures. Wujing did it himself. There is someone inside the left path who wants to kill the people here, and the way of death is dimensional infection. However, Chen Ming believes that since each of the researchers working here has the ability to research psychic technology, they are definitely not fools in terms of IQ. Even if they weren't psychic, they could definitely see the consequences of such an act of dismantling safety measures. Maybe doing this can really improve work efficiency, but it also completely loses security for them. It is impossible for all of them to have faith in Zhuojiao, and there will definitely be voices of protest in private. Their lives are gone, and the benefits gained from research and the value of the research itself are meaningless to them. It is impossible to really cooperate with Zhuojiao to complete the remaining research tasks. So Chen Ming boldly guessed that it was precisely because of this situation that Wujing arranged for Yi Lirong to come over. Chen Ming had seen the timing of these events before. The senior officials of Zhuojiao ordered the dismantling of the safety facilities of the experimental center just the day before he was to deal with all the Zhuojiao in the colony. The time when Yi Lirong came over was the second day after the colonial affairs began. Although it can be said that Yi Lirong came here because of the connection between the colony and the space station, such speculation cannot completely deny another possibility. It was because Zhuopath had dismantled the safety measures. In order to allow Zhuopath researchers to continue conducting research with confidence, they sent an official from the local Star District government to come over several times to verify the safety. Give these researchers peace of mind. In other words, come and bury them with them. If you think about it carefully, Yi Lirong is actually just the Minister of Culture and Tourism at the local district level. This position is embarrassing. It can make money, but there is absolutely no way to interfere with the government's major policies and trends. Zhuojiang doesn't seem to need money, because there are definitely people behind them sponsoring it. There's nothing to say about this. Some important information at the government decision-making level is definitely not something that the Minister of Culture and Tourism can know. What's more, there may be people in the government who have connections with Wujing, and it's not necessarily just Yi Lirong, the Minister of Culture and Tourism. The combination of so many factors, and the fact that Yi Lirong died alone with those researchers, did not seem to have a great impact. It wouldn't be a bad idea if we could conduct a big experiment at the end, doesn't it? Chen Ming is hard to say. In his opinion, the knowledge in the minds of these researchers is also of full value. There is no right or wrong in knowledge, only value. If Chen Ming were a senior executive at Zhujiang, he would never operate on these people for some experiments. Unless there are other reasons. For example, this space station will involve some left paths in other places. If the top management of Zhuojia believes that although there has been no trouble with the space station yet, since the Zhuojia elements in Chen Ming's colony have already had problems, then even if the space station can escape for a while, it will never escape forever. Those two colonies were previously regarded as the source of those captured for experiments on this space station, and it was impossible to completely separate the relationship. It's better to simply kill everyone who has anything to do with this matter to prevent more misunderstandings. If you just kill them, it will be a relatively loss. It is better to contribute a wave at the end and do a wave of experiments. Although Chen Ming's guess was purely a guess, it was still a logical guess. And he also noticed that there were actually communication devices inside and outside the isolation layer of the space station. And according to what he just found in the records in the communication database, there are requirements for regular contact every hour inside and outside the isolation layer of the space station. But it was clear that something was wrong with the people responsible for maintaining internal and external communications. It's not that the person responsible for this work has no contact, but that the internal and external communication lines are blocked, but there is no reaction from the outside. Chen Ming went out of his way to confirm it at this time. What he cut off was only the space station's communication with the outside world, and he also disguised it as a very common communication system failure, to prevent the underground laboratory on the planet from discovering the problems of the space station. The communication inside and outside the isolation layer was either cut off by him, or Zhuojing did it himself. Being able to cut off communications just when the dimensional infection was about to break out basically confirmed Chen Ming's guess that Zhuojing wanted to conduct a wave of space station-level dimensional infection experiments. A space station was destroyed quietly. As long as they handled the follow-up work well, they didn't have to worry about the news leaking. The last dimensional infection in Chen Ming's Zhuojia was probably caused by this. Of course, all of this is Chen Ming's speculation, but the truth of the matter shouldn't deviate too far. Along with this guess, there was also a piece of mixed information that Chen Ming analyzed. That is to say, Zhuojing definitely does not know the relationship between those who have survived the dimensional infection. After all, the president didn't know this before, so he offered to meet with him. Or when he really had this plan, he sensed the danger with his psychic ability, and then he and the president perfected the concept that those who experience dimensional infection are actually the coordinates of another dimension. Zhuojing is not him, and without his ability, they definitely don't know that the meeting of two dimensional infected people will lead to the location of the empire in another dimension. So the good thing about this information is, Zhuojing doesn't know this, and they will not take the initiative to use this to threaten the empire for profit, but will only use the diffusion and sequelae of the dimensional infection itself to make trouble. But the bad thing is that if they really don't know, they may directly let someone with experience in dealing with dimensional infection deal with this matter. This means letting a person who has experienced dimensional infection experience the dimensional infection again, so that the person who can only be a single coordinate can provide more information to the existence of another dimension. Idiots are sometimes more disgusting than pure bad guys. Bad people do things for a purpose, but idiots do things without logic. Once a fool gets something he shouldn't take, the consequences are absolutely unacceptable. Zhuojing just has both bad and stupid points. The bad ones are the top leaders of Zhuojing, and the stupid ones are the bottom of Zhuojing who believe in this cult. If someone really directly triggers this condition for the meeting of dimensional infected people, then the empire will definitely not only face the problem of the intensification of the wave of newborn deformities, because the encounter of the two-dimensional infected people will undoubtedly confirm the existence of a huge species in the other dimension. The empire will be in a huge trouble. It has to be quick. Even if it is impossible to stop Zhuojing from doing this kind of thing in other places, Chen Ming can at least not let his prosthesis of ManhwaRecap, who has experienced dimensional infection, meet with the people who may come to Zhuojing to deal with the follow-up matters of the space station. He has no way to guarantee whose Wujing will arrange to deal with the things here. Chen Ming immediately packed up all the data in the database. By the way, he took a last look at the part he was interested in, which was the data of the experiment that Wujing was conducting on the ground. However, the data here is similar to what he just investigated outside the underground laboratory. It is a plan called the Mind Beast Project, which creates the kind of mind beast that can cause people to have deformed tissues that make people feel good. There is no more detailed content, so we have to go to the laboratory to understand it. Taking advantage of the time when the aftermath of the psychic fluctuations of the dimensional infection had not completely dissipated, Chen Ming thought about it and simply turned back to the fork in the road he had not taken before. He had not yet passed the accommodation area on the other side. Although there might not be any living people around here, what if? It would never be wrong to confirm it. When Chen Ming came to the accommodation area, he could see nothing except many corpses of deformed stomach monsters lying near the dormitory whose quality was obviously much better than that of the outer layer of the space station. The source of the dimensional infection was dead, so the derivatives of these dimensional infections would naturally not survive. After searching for a while, Chen Ming found Yi Lirong's room. There were also only a few corpses with torn abdomens lying on the ground. One of the corpses was dressed in a suit and looked familiar. Chen Ming kicked him lightly, and after seeing the face twisted by fear, he didn't care about him anymore. He continued to wait in the experimental center for about 10 minutes. Wait until the psychic fluctuations of the dimensional infection completely dissipated. This dimensional infection incident ended here. Chen Ming stood up from the chair he had found and tidied up his clothes, which had not been repaired and were torn by his high-speed movement. He turned around and walked towards the way he had come from. The dimensional infection had been dealt with, so it was time for Zhu Jing to deal with it. He stepped into the winding and complex isolation layer again. As he gradually approached the outer perimeter of the isolation layer, Chen Ming did not hear any movement that should have existed, as if Zhu Jing had no intention of entering the experimental center. He had already separated the outermost layer of the space station. Zhu Jing must have noticed what was happening inside, but had other plans. It was not until Chen Ming came to the closed door between the isolation layer and the core personnel layer. He heard some noisy movement outside. The surveillance display at the door had not been closed by Zhu Jing. Most of the armed forces of the space station gathered here. Zhu Jing chose to guard the several gates leading to the outside of the isolation layer, as if waiting for something. Chen Ming estimated that they were waiting for reinforcements from their top leaders. However, if Chen Ming guessed correctly, the first thing this high-level reinforcement psychic would do when he arrived would probably be to open the isolation layer directly and release the dimensional infection. Of course, this is no longer possible now. The source of the dimensional infection has died and has become the condensed psychic source that Chen Ming has taken over. Chen Ming stood in front of the gate. Just now, he had changed his appearance back to an Wu Being's. He took a deep breath and adjusted his state to that of a person who had experienced a relatively serious battle. Panting, eyes stern, murderous intent, plus a few symptoms of chronic rage. Then he directly opened the gates between the core personnel area and the isolation area. Chen Ming himself felt that this state should look like a mental patient who had just fought with the security guards in the mental hospital and ran away. However, judging from the frightened expression of the densely packed leftist elements standing outside the door after the door opened, Chen Ming's appearance was quite effective. It was impossible for Zhu Jing to be really frightened by Chen Ming's appearance. Immediately, a Zhu Jing security captain holding an electromagnetic rifle shouted at Chen Ming, "Stop!" Others immediately pointed their guns at Chen Ming's forehead. "Hands up! Kneel down! Climb over slowly!" Chen Ming's mouth twitched. He exerted force on his feet and disappeared instantly with a breathtaking sonic boom. Because Chen Ming disappeared in an instant, the crowd who had not reacted could even say anything. Chen Ming had already rushed into the center of the crowd, besieging him outside. Chen Ming didn't even take the initiative to attack at this time. He just simply ran into it. Just like this, severed limbs and blood began to fly among the crowd. Screams and gunfire broke out. But the guns of these leftist elements failed to hit Chen Ming at all, and instead hit more of their own people. Even if there is a little bit of luck, it will not have any effect. Chen Ming's terrifying speed caused the knowledgeable people among the leftist elements to immediately react and shout to the people around them, "It's a psyker!" When the word psyker was shouted out, Chen Ming originally thought that he could at least intimidate them, but the leftist elements still maintained their crazy momentum and frantically wanted to kill him, but they did not succeed at all. Take it seriously. And the security captain who had just spoken and was not directly killed by Chen Ming also appeared again and shouted, "Psychics are human beings too. Haunt him." As soon as he finished speaking, more than a dozen people who were relatively close to Chen Ming hugged him desperately, shouting, "Lured of light will always shine." Then a strong smell of explosives suddenly emerged from their bodies. A real violent explosion occurred around Chen Ming. Even if the explosive killed many of Zhujiang's own people, these Zhujiang would not hesitate at all when they blew themselves up. They have almost lost the ability to judge themselves after believing in Zhujiang. They live purely for the concept of Zhujiang and die for this concept. The brainwashing techniques are evident. However, as the smoke and dust from the explosion gradually dispersed, except for the broken corpse on the left path, there were no corpses inside. Standing in the center of the smoke was a tall, ferocious creature. It is the product of Chen Ming's fusion of all the technologies of himself and the Zerg Queen. It is a Zerg special combat unit. The pitch-black giant humanoid insect stood there, looking down at everything like a pitch-black king. The aura it exudes makes even leftist elements feel fear. This is not the fear emanating from their brainwashed minds, but the fear that belongs to biological instinct. After fear comes more hysterical madness. Since the explosives just now completely cleared the area around Chen Ming, this gave Zhujiang a chance to output again. However, Chen Ming did not dodge this time, nor did he rush into the crowd of leftist elements again. The giant black insect just stayed where it was, motionlessly bearing the firepower coming from all directions. Next, these left paths saw what despair is. Any attack method belonging to them cannot cause any effective damage to this carapace. All the bullets were bounced away without leaving even a scratch. Many bullets even bounced directly back to other left-wing bodies, and the scene became chaotic again. And that giant black insect stood so calmly throughout the whole process, treating all left-wing elements as nothing. But at this moment, it's not that Chen Ming doesn't want to move, but he is getting used to this body. After adapting to Wuping's body, he had to adapt to the body of this Zerg special combat unit whose strength was many times greater than even Chen Ming himself knew. Otherwise, Chen Ming is really worried that one of his casual actions may completely destroy the basic structure of the space station. Speaking of which, Chen Ming found that he seemed to have been calling this body in Wuping, or a Zerg Special Operations Unit. This form has never been given a proper name. Would it be better to give it a name? The Dark Insect King? A giant black insect? These two names are a bit ugly, or it would be better to just call it the insect form. After all, the current body still has the possibility of progress in the future. If it changes again in the future, I might have to give it another name, and the insect form is quite vivid. Just when Chen Ming was thinking about how to choose a name in front of a bunch of crazy leftist elements, all those leftist elements suddenly moved away from Chen Ming, who was standing there. The reason is that just overhead, the large weapons on the outside of the space station have been activated and turned to target the interior of the space station. Chen Ming knew that this kind of independent space station would generally have some medium and large weapons as a means of defense. Although generally speaking, the weapons on this kind of space station are castrated versions, and military versions of large weapons are not available. But large weapons are weapons that can only be loaded on cruisers anyway. At least that was the case in the past, and their power is absolutely indescribable. However, although Chen Ming could hide at this time, he had no idea of escape. He wanted to try it. Chen Ming, who was in insect form, opened his eyelids that had been closed. It was not until this moment that Zhujiang saw the pair of scarlet eyes emitting a frenzied aura, and for a moment their noisy voices were reduced again. But then, their voices became louder again, and they felt a little excited. It was as if the main weapon aimed at the inside of the space station could directly kill the monster in front of them. At this moment, An expected solid Gauss shell directly penetrated several layers of the space station structure from the outside of the space station and rushed straight towards Chen Ming. The shell, made of super heavy element metal material, which was the size of a person, still had a strong power after passing through many structures. Chen Ming suddenly disappeared again in the same place, disappearing in the seriousness of Zwajing molecules. And a large number of spider web-like cracks appeared near the ground where he had just stood, which was proof of the violent impact. In a place where the reaction speed and vision of ordinary people like Zwajing molecules were completely different, Chen Ming directly chose to hedge against the Gauss shell. The psychic energy of the Queen of Insects fully supported Chen Ming's actions. After one punch, the momentum of the high-speed shell was not stopped, but the entire shell had been broken into hundreds of pieces from the inside. Under the interference of the surrounding space station structure, it was broken in an instant, and the broken fragments were embedded in different places in the space station. The black shell on Chen Ming's fist had some cracks that were difficult to see with the naked eye under the impact of large weapons. But it was repaired again in an instant under the influence of his psychic power. Following the Gauss shell, there were projectiles of storm needles that penetrated the damaged structure of the space station. Even the castrated version can launch tens of thousands of magnetic steel needles with a diameter of 3 to 5 centimeters and a length of nearly half a meter in a few tens of seconds. Chen Ming, who had nowhere to borrow power in midair, was directly knocked to the ground by the sea of steel needles. Countless steel needles continued to fall like a rainstorm. But Chen Ming, who had adjusted his posture in the air and landed, directly stood up straight from a half-kneeling posture with the steel needles. All the steel needles were either bounced off or directly hit the shell and shattered. He is now fully capable of withstanding the cruiser-level attacks with his physical body. ManhwaRecap is already able to destroy the ship with pure physical strength. This is the premise that Chen Ming has not used the more terrifying plasma. This is the product of the combination of Chen Ming's psychic power and the psychic power of the Queen of Zerg, the strength of ManhwaRecap, the special combat unit of the Zerg. The continuous steel needles gradually lost their subsequent support. Chen Ming jumped out of the steel needles on the ground and jumped in front of the left-handed elements who dared not say anything more. He reached out and grabbed the captain who had been constantly commanding the left-handed elements. In front of all the left-handed elements, he crushed his head and threw the headless body away casually like a rag doll. Chen Ming's mouth opened slightly, and the scorching breath dissipated from the brutal mouthparts of the insect form. After this breath, the crowd of left-handed elements once again raised a bloody storm. Chen Ming has already tested the ability of the insect form, so there is no need to hold back. All he has to do now is to kill. Completely eliminate the members of these cult organizations that have long lost their humanity. Chen Ming started from the gate on the side of the isolation layer of the space station and started the massacre all the way to the outside of the space station, just after Chen Ming had killed all the core personnel. At this time, the prosthesis at the 14th Corps suddenly received a call, or a video call. It was a call from Chen Xinghai. "Why did you suddenly call me at this time?" Chen Ming was obviously stunned for a moment. It was midnight on Earth Standard Time, and Chen Xinghai's call at this time seemed to have other meanings. He was not a fool, nor was he a child of a few years old who knew nothing. Bai Quan kept bringing Chen Xinghai to him, constantly hinting that anyone could see what Bai Quan meant. It was just that he was hesitating. Chen Ming was very hesitant, because he had really thought about this matter seriously. Chen Ming could also consider most of the various matters derived from this matter, as long as Bai Quan and others could consider them. Of course, he knew that this matter would be of great benefit to many people, including himself. And Chen Xinghai's conditions were indeed quite suitable. But the problem was also obvious. He had no time and energy to do things that were a little far from his goal, and casually agreeing to it would definitely delay people. This was a lifelong event, so he hesitated. Therefore, when Bai Quan deliberately mentioned that he would be away for a few days and asked Chen Xinghai to come to help substitute for the class, and his words hinted at it, Chen Ming still did not give Bai Quan a clear attitude, but agreed to continue to contact Chen Xinghai, even if it was not from an emotional point of view, but only from the perspective of interests. This kind of thing was indeed worth spending some of his energy on it. Of course, It would not work if it was purely based on interests. If Chang Xinghai was unwilling and unsuitable, but was tied together purely for interests, it would not be a good thing for both of them. Anyway, he had seen Bai Quan's attitude clearly, but he still wanted to figure out Chang Xinghai's attitude and whether they were suitable for each other. Chen Ming stared at the terminal and thought for more than 10 seconds. After thinking about the general situation, he answered the phone. Chang Xinghai waved and said hello, hello Chen Ming. Chen Ming controlled and whooping to tear off the neck of a left-handed molecule and used the prosthesis to pretend that everything was normal and greeted Chang Xinghai, hello. Chang Xinghai suddenly tilted his head. Why do you feel a little absent-minded? Don't you look at the time? Oh, what time is it now? Aren't you going to sleep? Chen Ming also recorded the workbench next to the prosthesis. The computer on it displayed several pages of dense and complex data. I am preparing for the next research. A catalytic core should be delivered to me in a few days. And you are the one who wants to call at this point? Chang Xinghai looked a little hesitant, tilted his head in another direction, and said, Did Uncle Bai tell you? He said that you will come to help me with the class later. Well, that's it. I came to tell you this. Chang Xinghai's tone of voice was a little unconfident, so Chen Ming naturally didn't believe this statement. Chang Xinghai called in the middle of the night, and he must have wanted to tell him something else at first. But Chang Xinghai was hesitant just like him. Chen Ming did not expose this, but avoided the topic tacitly like Chang Xinghai. The two looked at each other and were silent for a moment. Chang Xinghai suddenly broke the silence first. Then I will prepare the lesson plan. The lesson plan given by Uncle Bai is not the same as what I want. I will prepare one myself, which may take a few days. Thank you for your help. No trouble, then I'll hang up. Goodbye, thank you. Okay. After the communication ended, Chang Xinghai threw the terminal to the side of the bed and leaned back to lie on the bed. She stretched out her arms to block her eyes, and her mind was full of chaotic thoughts. She did hesitate. She had been in contact with Chen Ming for a while some time ago. When she was a captive playing games every day for more than half a month in a deep simulation, she basically understood Chen Ming. Because Chen Ming generally answered all her questions for Bai Quan's sake. Through these days of contact and understanding, she felt that she had no ill feelings towards Chen Ming, but she did not have too much affection beyond normal friendship. Maybe a little, but only a little, and it was not to the extent of further relationship. But just before she made this call, she thought that this was enough. She did not have many choices in the future. Either she would live alone or find someone to marry. And other marriage partners might not even have such feelings. So her original idea was to just tell Chen Ming directly. But just a little while before the call was connected, she thought of something else. What if Chen Ming did not have such an idea? What if Chen Ming's idea was completely different? Chang Xinghai remembered that in the simulation, she had never seen Chen Ming have particularly obvious ups and downs in emotions. Everything seemed to be nothing in Chen Ming's eyes, even for her. Only when the simulated battle was coming to an end, all the teammates died, and Chen Ming seemed to feel a little fun. No, Chang Xinghai suddenly remembered that when the simulation just started and Chen Ming found an opportunity to assassinate her, Chen Ming's emotions seemed to fluctuate violently. When she thought of Chen Ming, who usually had a calm expression as if nothing could affect him, shouting out a contrasting swear word because of her explosive power that almost kicked him to death, Chang Xinghai's mouth suddenly curled up for some reason. But she was still hesitating and struggling. She still planned to wait until tomorrow to find Uncle Bai, who was almost done with his work, and then ask him more about Chen Ming and Chen Ming's attitude. At this time, Chen Ming's mind was a little confused for a while after hanging up the phone. However, the situation on Wuping's side did not give him time to think. At this moment, on the Zhuojing space station, a thick black fog suddenly burst out from behind him, completely covering him. This was certainly not the black fog psychic that had been captured by Chen Ming, but the effect achieved by the heart-gathering spirit bead, black fog, of the glass bead psychic that Chen Ming had seen once. The psychic that Zhuojing had been looking forward to finally came after Chen Ming had slaughtered half of the Zhuojing space station. After Chen Ming was covered by the black fog. Outside the black fog, a psychic who was dressed like an ordinary person suddenly appeared here with the black fog. He casually threw away the broken black glass bead, stretched out his thumbs and index fingers, and made a tilted camera gesture. The psychic fluctuations gathered on him, and a miniature light ball with a little light appeared from the center of his gesture. When the size of the light ball instantly expanded to the size of an eyeball, the light ball suddenly emitted a thin and flickering beam of light, which rushed straight towards Chen Ming in the black fog. Although Chen Ming's perception was blocked by the black fog at this moment, he did sense this beam of light. However, he did not sense any danger from the beam of light at all, so he did not make any evasive movements. This beam of light had no entity, and it went straight through the black fog without being blocked by the black fog. And this beam of light had no lethality. It exploded directly after hitting Chen Ming's body, and some residual spots of light were suddenly absorbed by his body for some reason. However, as these spots of light entered his body, Chen Ming not only did not feel that he was hurt, but also felt that his mental power was more excited under the stimulation of this beam of light. This beam of light. Chen Ming frowned slightly and took a step forward. Hearing the sound of Chen Ming moving in the black fog, the psychic who had just arrived looked solemn and quickly retreated. At the same time, the diameter of the beam of light emitted by the light ball in front of him directly became twice as thick. However, immediately afterwards, he heard the sound of Chen Ming taking another step forward. His eyes widened slightly, as if he was a little bit unbelievable. But after confirming that he had not heard wrongly, he gritted his teeth again, changed the position of his hand, and directly held the light ball in his palm and threw the light ball in the direction of Chen Ming. After the light ball hit Chen Ming's body and did not cause any harm to Chen Ming, Chen Ming finally understood the effect of the psychic power of this psychic. This light ball is not a real light, and the psychic power of this psychic is not a beam of light as it seems. This light ball and beam are actually the embodiment of the essence of his psychic fluctuations. His psychic power is a pure spiritual ability. It is not the ability of Hu-Yi to control entropy and control external objects, nor is it the ability of the Queen of Insects to amplify itself. It is not the ability that Chen Ming had heard from Bai Quan to directly transform mental power into fire or water through psychic power. His ability has nothing to do with the outside world, and there is no interference from any other factors. It is to purely use psychic energy to release the effect through a powerful means. The light ball and light beam are just the embodiment of highly concentrated psychic energy. The full name of psychic is psychic ability user. And this psychic, Chen Ming feels that he can be directly called a psychic. Although the concept of psychic was thought up by Chen Ming, even he feels that it is a bit abstract. So it mainly depends on the effect of psychic energy. The effect of this psychic beam of this pure psychic is that after hitting, the person hit will actively absorb the light spot of his psychic energy embodiment. And these light spots will have some of his consciousness, which can directly hit the brain of the person hit and interfere from the psychic level. The importance of the brain to a psychic is self-evident. Doing so can definitely affect the normal use of psychic energy by a psychic. Those with slightly weaker mental power may even die directly because of the existence of this light spot. If you are lucky enough not to die, the brain will be affected, and it is almost the same as being disabled. It looks gentle on the surface, but the actual nature of this ability is very cruel. However, Chen Ming's current Enwupiing's brain is purely for show. He transferred his consciousness to Enwupiing through psychic power, and he didn't need a brain carrier like ordinary Zerg to control the Zerg body. His consciousness exists in every corner of Enwupiing's body. Every action of Enwupiing is a direct command from his consciousness to the body tissues and organs, and it doesn't even need to be transmitted through nerves. The brain doesn't need to do anything at all. The only use of Enwupiing's brain is to maintain the instinctive activities of various organs in this body. The psychic power of this psychic can interfere with the brain from the psychic level, and it also interferes with consciousness, not directly with the body. Otherwise, this light spot will definitely not be able to directly pass through the carapace on Chen Ming's body. Since it can't affect the brain to continue to maintain the operation of physiological functions, it can't affect Chen Ming, whose consciousness is not in the brain at all. Although such ability is very cruel, it has no meaning for Chen Ming, who is in a prosthesis. By the way, will this psychic be the one who is responsible for brainwashing by Zhuijing? This thought suddenly flashed through Chen Ming's mind, but after thinking about it, he didn't think it was possible. The psychic power of the psychic responsible for brainwashing should be milder and more bewitching. He should be a charlatan, not the current person. However, Chen Ming felt that this psychic was very interesting. After all, this was the first psychic he had seen whose psychic power relied purely on his mental power and psychic ability. After Chen Ming had this idea, a 3-meter-tall human-shaped gap suddenly appeared on the black fog that seemed to have trapped him just now. At the moment when the psychic barely reacted in his brain, but his body had no time to react at all. Chen Ming had already rushed out of the black fog and stopped in front of him. He grabbed his neck with one hand and pinched the psychic like a chicken. The fingers exerted a little force to compress the carotid artery and prevent blood from flowing to the brain. The psychic instantly fell into shock. As soon as Chen Ming let go, he fell directly to the ground and collapsed into a ball. Being dragged by Chen Ming, he found a spaceship that had not yet left the space station and stuffed it into the frozen hibernation chamber and came back to take it away. This is his third psychic captive. Chen Ming felt that he had to go back and ask Bai Quan if he could directly apply for an artificial spiritual awakening nerve for the experiment, instead of spending contribution points to exchange for spiritual awakening nerves. The arrival of the psychic was just a small episode. After all, it was only 2 minutes from his appearance to being knocked unconscious by Chen Ming. Chen Ming didn't even have time to have any impression of his face before he once again threw himself into the hunt for the left-handed elements on the space station. In addition to giving and whooping extremely strong physical fitness, the Queen's technology also gave it terrifying perception. Sense heat sources, sense heartbeats, and sense many things that human perception cannot sense. So Chen Ming could easily find those left-handed elements hiding in every corner of the space station that had completely collapsed. Of course, Chen Ming didn't kill everyone, because there were indeed some ordinary people inside the space station. Although there were not many people, Chen Ming had slaughtered more than half of the space station, and there were only 3 in total. But Chen Ming did save their lives. Even if the 3 of them chose to pick up weapons from the bodies of the left-handed elements to resist out of fear, Chen Ming still did not kill them, but only remove their weapons. He could directly extract the real list of left-handed elements through the database of the space station. There was no need to worry about not being able to distinguish which ones had problems and which ones did not. Chen Ming would not kill the wrong people, nor would he miss anyone. Of course, even if there was a list, Chen Ming was not 100% sure that the 3 people were good people. So just now he took some local materials and took some steel materials from the wall and twisted them into a twist to tie them up. He planned to keep it for the people who came later to investigate. As long as the investigation later found that there was no problem, the person would naturally be released. If there was a problem, someone would naturally help him deal with it. Half an hour later, Chen Ming thoroughly swept through several areas of the space station, from the core experimental center of the space station, all the way to the outermost internal personnel layer of the space station, all places, without missing a single one. All the left-handed elements died in his hands. Chen Ming has now turned into a monster stained with blood. But this is Zhuijing's blood, so Chen Ming has no psychological burden at all now, and he feels a little relieved. After confirming again that there is no one he needs to kill on the space station, Chen Ming went to the database. He left a message that will be automatically sent after the 5-hour agreement between him and the Anti-Cult Bureau. He deleted a lot of content about him, leaving only some clues for those who come to investigate later. Then Chen Ming came to the port of the internal personnel layer and boarded the spaceship where he placed the psychic. He was ready to do the last thing he had to do today. But before leaving, Chen Ming took another look at the external personnel layer that he had separated before. The external personnel layer was automatically divided into 4 parts after separation, and each part had a separate life support system. And the number of ordinary people in each part is far more than that of Zhuijing here. Zhuijing is not afraid of death, but since ordinary people have an advantage in numbers, they are indeed capable of resisting Zhuijing elements. Chen Ming could see through the remote signal connection monitoring that all 4 sections of the external personnel layer were dominated by ordinary people. The left-handed elements were basically all under control. However, just when Chen Ming was about to leave with peace of mind, he suddenly found the section where the separated distress signal office was located. Shi Xiao from the Distress Signal Management Department was leaning in the corner of the office. He held a knife against Uncle Mao's neck. In front of Shi Xiao were other people in the office who had also reacted. They were holding sticks and weapons that they didn't know where they found, and they were in a stalemate in the office, and it seemed that they had been in a stalemate for a long time. For other people, Chen Ming could die at will, but Uncle Mao, who had helped him, must not die. Chen Ming drove the spaceship out of the space station and set the spaceship's autopilot system to go to the vicinity of the planet's atmosphere. Then he jumped out of the spaceship and entered the universe in his physical body. In his insect form, the carapace and elytra on his back opened, revealing the same type of biological clock jet holes as the Queen's biological spacecraft. With a gray-green tail flame, he flew to the space station area that had drifted away for a distance. At this time, in the Distress Signal Management Office, Uncle Mao reached out and grabbed Shi Xiao's arm to prevent him from being strangled. There were already several blood marks on his neck, and blood was flowing slightly. His forehead was covered with sweat, and he might fall down at any time. One of his colleagues in front of him tried to persuade him again with a nervous look on his face. Shi Xiao, you should know what is going on with this space station. The structure of the space station suddenly separated. Someone is definitely targeting Zhuijing. If you surrender now, you can get a lighter sentence when you are caught. Shi Xiao spat directly and cursed. Do you fucking think I am a fool? What's the difference between being caught and dying as Zhuijing? I might as well change a few people before I die. The colleague persuaded again. But you didn't kill Brother Mao directly now, which means you haven't thought it through yet. You still want to live, not die. But if you really do something to Brother Mao, you will really die. Shut up. Shi Xiao's face turned black, and he swung the pointed kitchen knife twice in the air in front of him. The knuckles that had turned white due to excessive force looked even paler. Just when he had no time to put the kitchen knife back on Uncle Mao's neck, a dark hand covered with carapace suddenly tore through the wall behind him and reached out to grab his face. Pull back hard, accompanied by a sound of something bursting. Shi Xiao's headless body fell directly to the ground. The blood and white things from his head bursting splashed all over the people in the room. Especially Uncle Mao, who was closest to him, heard the sound of the body falling behind him and turned his head slowly and stiffly. It just happened to coincide with Chen Ming's action of looking inside from the hole he tore. Looking at that brutal face, those scarlet eyes, smelling the bloody smell that was almost thick enough in the space station, and the stench of Shi Xiao's incontinence who had just died. No one dared to make any move. Chen Ming did not make any extra moves. After confirming that Uncle Mao was safe, he left the room in the fearful eyes of several people in the room. Uncle Mao was stunned for a few seconds, and his fearful eyes suddenly changed. He suddenly realized something, and immediately rushed to the crack in the wall, shouting outside, "And whooping? Is that you?" Chen Ming heard it, but did not look back. He jumped into the universe again. He had no time to take care of people, he could only save them, and then it was up to them. He had to go to the ground again. See what Zhuijing was doing with another Mind Beast project. Since Zhuijing was already doing something on the space station, he took the initiative to leak the dimensional infection. Will there be a similar situation on the ground? Although, the periphery of the underground laboratory, those areas covered by his surveillance, seemed to be normal at present. But what happened in the core of the laboratory, where Chen Ming's metal liquid could not penetrate for the time being, was still unknown. Soon after, Chen Ming returned to the spacecraft that he had set up the autopilot system for, and headed for the planet's atmospheric orbit. Chen Ming had already locked the location of the laboratory, and kept the spacecraft directly above the laboratory after entering orbit. There was no rush to go to the corpse pit that was some distance away from the laboratory, because he had previously separated a portion of the metal liquid and left a mark there, and nothing had happened near the pit so far. He only needed to go to the laboratory. The laboratory's peripheral main control and database systems were already under control, and when he went to the laboratory, He only had to ensure that the peripheral database was intact. However, Chen Ming also wanted the experimental data of the Mind Beast project in the deepest part of the laboratory. A research that could resist dimensional infection and erosion. It was impossible to say that he was not interested. It was just that he had no way of determining whether there was any accident in the deepest part of the laboratory. In fact, if there was an accident, it would be a good thing, because then he only needed to deal with the Mind Beast, and Zhuojing should not be able to touch the remaining laboratory database. But if there was no accident, then he had to go directly to the innermost part of the laboratory as soon as possible. Otherwise, if his subsequent intrusion caused Zhuojing to directly delete the data in the database and directly destroy the basis of data storage from the physical level, his psychic power may not be able to repair the deleted data. Of course, this is not necessarily the case, not impossible. Chen Ming has always been conducting strange research on his psychic power. This includes storing data in a storage device and then deleting the data to repair it. Or, on the basis of the previous, destroy the device after deleting the data and then try to repair it. The final conclusion is that as long as the modules that record data in the storage device are not overwritten by new data, he can repair it. Directly repair the deleted data. But if the data is overwritten, it will not work. And if the device has lost its basic structure, such as being completely melted into an iron block or ground into powder, it will also lead to irreparable. Chen Ming is not sure whether the Zhuojing molecules will dismantle the device if they really delete the data. It is better to enter the deepest part of the laboratory as soon as possible. Don't think about whether the Zhuojing molecules have the possibility of doing so. Just assume that they will definitely do so. Chen Ming just knew the easiest way to get into the depths of the laboratory. The spacecraft hovering at the top of the planet's atmosphere suddenly opened its hatch. After a turbulent airflow, the spacecraft entered a vacuum state. Chen Ming's half-body stuck out of the hatch. He had long wanted to try to break into the atmosphere alone. But before Chen Ming really jumped down, he suddenly thought of something else. According to the information he has currently investigated from the databases of the space station and the underground laboratory, Zhuojing created clones on the space station, tried to cause dimensional infection, and conducted subsequent experiments, and the results he investigated on the space station were indeed the case. In the underground laboratory on the surface of the planet, Zhuojing was conducting an experiment called the Mind Beast project. The two laboratories are independent of each other, but they are also connected to each other, and they are conducting various exchanges that need to be verified with each other. For example, the bodies that have undergone the Mind Beast project are sent to the space station to test whether the Mind Beast can resist dimensional infection. So is it possible that the opposite situation exists? For example, Zhuojing sent the troubles caused by dimensional infection, such as those deformed stomach monsters, to the underground laboratory for related experiments. Since Zhuojing has verified that the infectiousness of dimensional infection can be completely blocked by the assistance of silent alloy and some other materials, will there be traces of dimensional infection in the underground? Although the probability is very low, after all, dimensional infection is not triggered by clones, but occurs randomly on clones. And if there is only one source of dimensional infection, then when Chen Ming deals with the source of dimensional infection on the space station, the dimensional infection has been completely solved. But the problem is that if there are two sources of dimensional infection here in Zhuojing, it will be a bit dangerous for Chen Ming to go down. Of course, it is not himself who is in danger, but the Empire and the universe environment. Chen Ming is still more willing to believe that Zhuojing really has the courage to cause two dimensional infections in the same galaxy. After all, there have been precedents for this situation. It just so happened that the president gave him a copy of the last dimensional infection 2 days ago, which was impossible to read in a short time. It can be said to be absolutely comprehensive information. According to the content of the information, although there were only 2 recorded dimensional infection incidents that actually broke out, one was experienced by the president and the other by Chen Ming. Of course, there was another unrecorded incident that Chen Ming speculated happened on the left side. However, there are indeed unrecorded dimensional infection incidents that only existed in the early stage and were directly extinguished, and there are quite a few of them. Chen Ming still remembers that the president said that the Empire did not directly ban cloning technology after the first dimensional infection, because the sequelae were not discovered so quickly at that time. So these unrecorded dimensional infections basically occurred during the period from the first dimensional infection to the ban on cloning technology. After the first dimensional infection incident, the cloning experiments in various laboratories are still ongoing. According to the records, almost all clones showed physical deformation in the future, but most of the deformations of these clones were simply affected by another dimension, similar to the deformity of newborns, rather than real dimensional infection. Only a small number of clones really showed the precursor of dimensional infection. And then, of course, people died. Even with the first dimensional infection in front of them, each laboratory prepared follow-up treatment methods before conducting experiments. But not many of these methods were effective. In the earliest period, the most effective way to curb the spread of initial dimensional infection was to drive the warship directly to the door of the laboratory, aim large or even main weapons at the laboratory, and bomb directly if there was a problem. So even if it was an initial dimensional infection, as long as it occurred, the mortality rate of all people directly involved was 100%. Then after many experiments, the laboratories that communicated with each other really obtained some valuable data from the dimensional infection, and safety measures were naturally implemented. It is similar to the silent alloy isolation layer that Zhujiang is making now. It is indeed effective and can stop the expansion of dimensional infection. And these silent alloy isolation layers can block the continued expansion of the existence of dimensional infection, but they cannot block the dimensional infection on the clones. The source of the outbreak of dimensional infection can be directly sealed in the necessary blocking equipment in a targeted manner. Many cloning laboratories in the Empire have found a way that seems to be perfect and effective at first glance, and naturally continue to increase the intensity of experiments on clones. This situation is indeed a good thing at first glance. Isolating the clones can still trigger the dimensional infection they want, and sending people directly to the isolation room also saves a lot of trouble. However, no experiment can guarantee that there will never be any problems. The development of science and technology itself is progressing in failure. Once the experiment related to dimensional infection fails, it is very likely to lead to dimensional infection leakage. The mortality rate of dimensional infection leakage can be said to be high. To be precise, as long as it fails, the mortality rate is 100%. Even psychics are no exception. No psychic can survive the leakage of dimensional infection, even in the early stage. So far, at the level of the Empire, except for the President and Chen Ming, there are no survivors who have personally experienced the dimensional infection. In addition, no matter how good the protective measures are, there will definitely be loopholes. Even if the dimensional infection is restricted for a long time, there is a possibility of leakage. Once the dimensional infection is leaked, a large number of people will die again. Later, the wave of deformed children began to be noticed, and the president gradually discovered the connection between deformed children and dimensional infection. The emergence of sequelae caused the Empire's newborns to have a deformity rate of up to 90% for at least the next 20 years. Even if the Empire has cryopreservation technology that can extend human life in disguise, the lack of newborns in these 20 years is indeed a heavy blow to the Empire. Although it is not to the point of direct collapse, if this time continues to extend, it will be really fatal. So after half a year of testing and verification, and the death of a large number of top scientific researchers, the Empire finally decided to completely ban this technology and seal all related information, and only the president and some government officials are qualified to use it. Of course, now, because Zhujiang is suspected to have studied dimensional infection and created survivors who survived dimensional infection, coupled with the dimensional infection that Chen Ming experienced some time ago, the two sequelae are suspected to be overlapping. In order to completely solve the troubles of Zhujiang and dimensional infection and carry out targeted prevention, some information related to dimensional infection has been released at some levels. Chen Ming doesn't know whether Zhujiang learned the way to isolate dimensional infection from these released news or developed it himself. No matter which one, they are now definitely the same as the cloning laboratories in the Empire that discovered new phenomena after experiencing the first dimensional infection incident and continue to invest in research. They believe that the isolation method is very safe and invest manpower, material resources, and financial resources without any scruples. Expanding the research on dimensional infection. These are all based on historical data as evidence, not Chen Ming's random guesses. So at this moment, he stood in front of the open hatch of the spacecraft outside the atmosphere. Directly regarded the worst result as the most likely result, that is, Zhuojing also conducted dimensional infection experiments in the underground laboratory. According to this, even if Zhuojing didn't actually do this, he wouldn't suffer too much loss. Chen Ming raised his vigilance, then mobilized the metal liquid he left in the underground laboratory and went to the closed door in the northernmost and most core part of the laboratory. Before, he was worried that his own spiritual power would be exposed, so he didn't dare to break the door directly. But now that he was going to break in directly, and he also believed that he could directly control the situation and delete the data that was not beneficial to him, there was no need for him to deliberately make some reservations. Although the door made of silent alloy material could block psychic fluctuations and prevent Chen Ming's psychic energy from acting on it. But the strength of this metal itself was not the top one. It could not stop physical attacks. Just time it well, and let the metal liquid go in a little while before he landed to confirm the situation inside. If the metal liquid really found dimensional infection, Chen Ming would delay the action slightly. If no signs of dimensional infection were found, then rush in directly. After thinking it through, Chen Ming no longer hesitated, released his hand on the hatch handle, and jumped off the spacecraft. Gravity made him go straight down. After adjusting his posture in the air, the biomass nozzle behind him ejected a large amount of gray-green tail flames, which once again provided him with a huge amount of acceleration. Under the dual acceleration of gravity and biological engines, Chen Ming rushed to the ground like a meteorite. The atmosphere of this planet is relatively high and thick. At this speed, it will take about 2 minutes to reach the ground from outside the atmosphere. It just so happened that the metal liquid also turned into a metal filament with a thickness of only one molecule at this moment, directly penetrating the silent alloy membrane at the bottom of the door. And the single molecule structure made by Chen Ming just bypassed the induction line in the middle of the silent alloy membrane and did not trigger the alarm. This is an unexpected surprise, but it is meaningless, because the big noise he is going to make next is not something that can be covered up without an alarm now. As the metal liquid entered the deepest part of the laboratory in large quantities, Chen Ming immediately saw a whole piece of chaos. There were corpses everywhere, and flesh and blood tissues that were completely integrated with the metal walls everywhere. All things related to living things had the heart-shaped distortion that Chen Ming had seen in the corpse pit before. The shape used to express love, after being expressed by distorting human tissue or flesh and blood tissue of unknown things, still gave Chen Ming a feeling of nausea even though he had seen it once. It was not just because of the nausea of sensing the fluctuations of the psychic beast's energy, but the real nausea that made people physically uncomfortable. It was this scene that formed a sharp contrast with the stability and harmony in other parts of the laboratory. Chen Ming held back the unnecessary feelings. The metal liquid expanded directly underground without hesitation, and quickly found the main control room and monitoring room that were also covered with flesh and blood. The equipment made of metal liquid was hacked into it and instantly took control of the core area of the laboratory. And through monitoring and spreading metal liquid, it was confirmed that there was indeed no sign of dimensional infection in the underground laboratory. Although Chen Ming did see the corpses of the distorted stomach monsters, they were just corpses. When the source died, these distorted stomach monsters naturally died. Moreover, the corpses of these distorted stomach monsters were not affected by the surrounding heart-shaped distorted flesh and blood. It seems that the psychic beast and dimensional infection are indeed mutually exclusive. At the same time as discovering this, Chen Ming still had 40 seconds before landing. He even had time to take a few glances at the database. The content in the database can only be said to be similar to that on the space station. When the Mind Beast plan went wrong, the core of the laboratory did warn the outside of the laboratory. However, all these warning signals were blocked by someone with ulterior motives. If Chen Ming did not interfere, it would probably take until the Mind Beast inside developed before people outside would find out that something was wrong inside. Then the door opened, and it was a good experimental process. This is Jing. Chen Ming temporarily stopped investigating the database. At this moment, there were 10 seconds left before he reached the ground. Feeling the high heat caused by friction with the atmosphere, he slowly calmed down and prepared for the battle. And inside the laboratory, the management of the area outside the laboratory had anxiously opened a communication channel. The person in charge of laboratory safety had already observed Chen Ming while he was still flying in the atmosphere, and immediately reported that Chen Ming was about to fall overhead. Of course, they still thought it was just a meteorite at this time. However, when their high-precision scanner detected the ferocious creature that was rushing straight underground, they only felt their scalps tingling. After a communication on the emergency communication channel, they found that they had no means to stop this creature. Even the psychic responsible for laboratory security could not withstand the impact from the starry sky. No one could interfere with Chen Ming's actions. When Chen Ming, in his insect form with a red tail flame, hit a flat ground on the planet at a terrifying high speed, the visible shock wave was accompanied by a huge amount of dust that almost rushed straight into the sky and stirred around. The roar of the violent impact excluded all the sounds within a radius of dozens of kilometers. The ground collapsed and collapsed at the core of the impact, leaving only a straight deep pit leading directly to the ground. After hitting the ground, Chen Ming continued to penetrate thousands of meters deep underground, directly smashing the structure of the laboratory and rushing into the core area that had been covered by the flesh and blood of the mind beast. The pitch-black carapace exuded a burning breath, and even the impact caused by Chen Ming's continuous acceleration could not cause any effective damage to him. The impact that was faster than the shells of the Gauss cannon was nothing to Chen Ming. The burning heat on Chen Ming's body gradually dissipated, and he didn't care about Jing who might come from outside, and chose to go directly to the mind beast. Anyway, if Jing dared to open the door now, he would die. The influence of the mind beast could even fascinate him. It was a luxury for some ordinary people to survive a face-to-face encounter. Even if there was Jing, there were still psychics here, and they could only protect themselves at most. There was nothing to say. It would only be a waste of time to deal with Jing later. It would be better to deal with the mind beast. Chen Ming walked straight to the center of the laboratory. The surrounding environment immediately conveyed a disgusting emotion to him after Chen Ming started to act. Those human tissues that clearly belonged to different people but were stuck together made him once again experience what disgust was. Come to think of it, everything related to this extreme psychic energy seems to be a bit disgusting. It's all blood and flesh. Is this a kind of rule? This thought flashed through Chen Ming's mind, but he didn't get entangled in it at the first time. Instead, he suppressed this idea in his heart and suppressed this nausea. Now everything else is empty, and killing the mind beast is the most important thing. Through the monitoring in the deepest part of the laboratory that has not been completely damaged, Chen Ming easily determined the location of the mind beast. However, when Chen Ming came here, he found that this mind beast did not look like a beast at all. It was just a piece of meat that was constantly expanding. Through the perception of psychic energy, Chen Ming could clearly feel that the core of this mind beast was a spirit stone that had been fused with flesh and blood, and the essence of the mind beast. According to the research data found by Chen Ming from the database here, the mind beast is just a byproduct of the mind beast project research. What Jing is really researching is to use the extreme emotions of the spirit stone to affect the nature of the body. It is not to kill people directly like the corpse in the deep pit, but to make people and spirit stones coexist together. Somewhat similar to parasitism. It is just to let people parasitize the spirit stone. Let people become similar to the nature of the spirit stone, protect people's existence, and prevent people from being eroded by dimensional infection. And these mind beasts are the result of failed experiments. That is, the manifestation of the spirit stone eroding the human body in reverse, and it is also the source of the name of this plan. Looking at the meat that is slowly wriggling in front of him, Chen Ming's nausea has reached the extreme. Chen Ming can't hold it back. Everything he did before was based on safety. Since there is no problem with safety, there is only the simplest thing left for him to do. Chen Ming leaned forward slightly and made a forceful move. The dark beast flew onto the bloated body of the mind beast in an instant. The spikes on the arm slid into the body of the mind beast like a hot knife, cutting cold oil, tearing a gap big enough for Chen Ming, who was now 3 meters tall, to get in. And when Chen Ming exerted force again, a hole appeared in the center of the meat block, running through the front and back. Chen Ming appeared behind the meat block, and what he held in his hand was the spiritual stone that was attached to the flesh and blood tissue. Part of the spiritual stone had begun to turn into flesh and blood, and there were some biological reactions. Some of the boneless flesh and blood that were almost equivalent to growing on the spiritual stone immediately entangled Chen Ming's hands after leaving the meat block. One part wanted to return to the original body, and the other part wanted to occupy Chen Ming's body. Chen Ming would certainly not let this thing realize any idea. A trace of plasma appeared in his palm, directly carbonizing all the flesh and blood on the spiritual stone. After knocking the spiritual stone on the wall next to it and shaking off all the carbonized flesh and blood tissue, Chen Ming got another spiritual stone. Its psychic trait is obsession. It has a dark red heart-shaped pattern that looks like dried blood. When holding this obsession spirit stone, Chen Ming was a little relaxed because his goal was solved. But suddenly he remembered something. Just 2 hours ago, the metal liquid that he had released in advance to follow Zhuo Jing's spacecraft to the planet sensed the existence of ManhwaRecap's fake body in the laboratory. But since he fell from the sky, the sense of danger he had felt before has not appeared again. Not until he came to the meat mountain-like mind beast. Even after taking down the core of the mind beast, the spirit stone, he still didn't feel any danger. It was as if the sense of danger he had sensed before had nothing to do with the mind beast. Or was it because his insect form's ability skyrocketed, so he could no longer sense danger from the mind beast that had sensed danger? Chen Ming felt that the situation should not be like this. The ability of his unwhooping fake body, whether in normal state or insect form, is integrated, and it is impossible to say that it was sensed wrong. But the fact is that the mind beast he just faced could not pose any threat to him. The nausea caused by the things on this pile of meat could not bring him anything in practical sense. Protected by the word of madness spirit stone, this impression belonging to another type of spirit stone could not pose a threat to him at all, which was determined at the earliest time. So what is the real threat? Chen Ming put away the spirit stone and swept his eyes around the gradually dissolving meat body. However, there was still no discovery. The sense of danger he had sensed before just disappeared out of thin air. Chen Ming did not even notice when it disappeared. Obviously, his metal liquid had been staying in the laboratory. Although it did not directly enter the innermost part of the laboratory, since he could feel the danger before, he should be able to feel the danger later. But the sense of danger just disappeared. The situation was very strange. The more Chen Ming thought about it, the more he felt something was wrong. He could be sure that it was definitely not the mind beast that threatened him, but something else. There must be something else in the laboratory. But this thing did not appear at this moment. Chen Ming took over all the monitoring systems in the laboratory that were still in operation through the metal liquid and did not find anything wrong. The only place with movement was the laboratory and the door at the deepest part of the laboratory. Some Zhuo Jing members, with the support of a psychic, worked hard to reclose the open door and clean up all the flesh and blood tissues of the mind beast that spread out. Zhuo Jing finally discovered that something was wrong in the deepest part of the laboratory because of the movement of Chen Ming falling from the sky and his trajectory of rushing directly into the deepest part of the laboratory. There was no response. So they really opened the door. As a result, the psychic fluctuations of the mind beast dissipated, and the flesh and blood tissues that had been covering the door and had no movement suddenly began to proliferate. Although the flesh and blood tissues derived from the mind beast did not have the extremely disgusting spreading ability and the terrifying situation of infecting people into non-human monsters like the dimensional infection, but the flesh and blood of the mind beast and the psychic fluctuations it spread out were also aggressive. Moreover, the mind beast was different from the dimensional infection. Even if the core of the mind beast was destroyed, the rest of the derived tissues of the mind beast would still remain active for a period of time. So even if Chen Ming had killed the source and taken away the source's obsession spirit stone, there are still a lot of psychic fluctuations active in the whole laboratory, and a lot of distorted flesh and blood tissues are still alive. Once the door is opened, these psychic fluctuations will act on the brains of those ordinary people, attracting them to pounce on the flesh and blood tissues that are twisted into a heart shape. Those who are affected by infatuation and pounce on them will be gnawed by these flesh and blood tissues to maintain the survival of the flesh and blood. And those places that have not had time to be gnawed will grow heart-shaped, twisted, and deformed tissues, gradually merging with other flesh and blood. Of course, if the corpse is dragged away in advance, it should be able to barely preserve a little human form. And this is the source of the corpses that were dumped into the deep pit before. The mind beasts and the safety measures in the laboratory are easy to deal with, but the leaked ones are not so easy to deal with. With the support of a psychic, Zhuo Jing can only barely close the door and rest at the door. Speaking of which, the single molecule-sized hole left by Chen Ming before did not affect the leakage of the mind beast. Didn't Chen Ming fill it up? But the property of the silent alloy film itself. The silent alloy film is composed of multiple layers of silent alloy molecules stacked together. There is a special link between different molecules, similar to the molecular bond that maintains the molecular structure, but it is larger. And its nature is to block the penetration of psychic energy fluctuations and play the role of isolating psychic energy fluctuations. Just looking at the material properties of the silent alloy itself, it is impossible to block the penetration of psychic energy fluctuations. Therefore, there will still be this special link inside the molecular loophole left by Chen Ming, blocking the penetration of psychic energy fluctuations. Therefore, when Chen Ming's metal liquid came in, the psychic energy fluctuations of the mind beast did not leak out. So now Zhuo Jing can stand safely at the door after opening and closing the door. When seeing this scene, Chen Ming suddenly thought, since he couldn't find the source of the danger, why not just go out and get rid of Zhuo Jing first? If Zhuo Jing was gone, he could completely rest assured to conduct a comprehensive investigation of the laboratory without worrying about being disturbed. Chen Ming thought about it, and it seemed that there was no problem with doing so he took a step outward in the direction of the laboratory. However, at the moment when he hadn't taken the second step yet, he suddenly felt a chill again. Chen Ming immediately turned his head vigilantly, and the chill had turned into an extreme sense of danger in the process of turning his head, the sense of danger that could threaten Wuping's prosthesis. He felt a breath coming from inside the laboratory, a chaotic but not messy breath, but a dangerous breath with a unique order. Chen Ming looked accurately in the direction where the breath came from. As his eyes moved, heavy and dense footsteps slowly sounded in that direction. The sense of danger continued to rise even though it was enough to threaten Wuping's survival. This huge sense of danger seemed to be able to kill him easily. It was more terrifying than the danger he had sensed with the metal liquid before. Something was wrong. The last time Chen Ming sensed this level of danger was when the pirate space station was almost hit by the tachyon spear head-on. The direct shot of the tachyon spear may not be able to kill Wuping now, so how can a product from the Zhuo Jing laboratory do that? Chen Ming was a little bit unbelievable in his heart, but the danger perception ability had protected him many times, and he could not go against the feeling told by his instinct. And the situation may not be the same as before. For example, Chen Ming's body can actually be solved with a pistol, but his body's combat ability is definitely not weak. So this thing is very likely not able to kill Wuping directly from the physical level, but can kill Wuping in other ways. Just be alert to this method. However, in addition to the wrong perception of danger, Chen Ming also felt that the size of the movement of the thing was not right. The time when the Mind Beast plan went wrong was about the same as the time when the dimensional infection on the space station went wrong, and the spreading flesh and blood tissue did not have time to destroy the laboratory equipment. So the number of damaged surveillance in the laboratory was not large, and the direction from which the movement came was the same. Such a heavy sound, the body must not be small, and it is impossible to avoid his surveillance. Then why didn't he see it just now? Chen Ming was about to adjust the surveillance to see what was going on in advance, and the heavy footsteps suddenly became hurried. He made more dense and heavier footsteps as if he was sprinting, like a beast that found its prey, which made people wonder what was behind the sound. Chen Ming was not affected by the hurried sound and immediately called up the surveillance. At the source of the sound at the corner a distance ahead, there should be something there, but there was nothing on the surveillance. However, when Chen Ming really raised his head, the source of the dense and heavy footsteps came out from the corner in front. This is a creature, perhaps it can be called a creature. A columnar creature supported by the arms of countless people who have lost all their fingers and only have their palms. On top of these hundreds of arms is also a columnar body with layers of broken arm links, with blood and flesh sticking together, rolled flesh and broken bones everywhere. The body was shaking and trembling constantly, spilling a large amount of blood visible to the naked eye. At the top was a head with two faces, front and back. The front was a neutral smiling face with a charming feeling. The back was an expressionless cold face. Both faces looked like the faces carved on the totem pole. But if it was really a totem pole, it would be fine, because the two faces Chen Ming saw now were a kind of mask face forcibly shaped by flesh and blood, using human faces through the force distortion method that Chen Ming had seen many times. This situation is disgusting. However, it doesn't matter what this thing looks like. Chen Ming has seen all kinds of ugly things more than once. The important thing is the threat and sense of danger brought by this thing, which is exactly the existence that Chen Ming had perceived before that could pose a fatal threat to Whooping. Chen Ming already felt something was wrong, and after seeing this thing with his actual naked eyes, Chen Ming felt something was wrong even more. It seems to be a product of a mixture of multiple psychic natures. Although it is very strange, there is an inexplicable coordination. Chen Ming took another look at the surveillance. It was confirmed that this totem pole-like existence could only be seen with the naked eye. The blood dripping from its body also did not appear in the surveillance and could only be seen clearly with the naked eye. The fact that the surveillance could not lock on it alone showed that it was a troublesome thing. Although it was dangerous, Chen Ming felt that he had to try it. He made a strong move. However, just before he really rushed out, he suddenly stopped. Drops of cold sweat emerged from his original forehead. Just a little bit, he was just a little bit away from death. Just before he rushed out, his sense of danger reached its peak. If he really rushed over, he would be dead. Fighting with this totem pole will definitely cause trouble. He must not get close. Chen Ming casually pulled a large piece of iron sheet from the wall next to him, twisted it into a javelin shape, secreted some keratin at the tip of the metal javelin, and threw it at the monster. The javelin easily penetrated the body of the totem pole monster, and the entire javelin was directly nailed into the wall behind it and shattered under the huge impact force. However, Chen Ming's face became even worse. Because when the javelin penetrated the monster, it did not pierce it, but went through it directly and did not hit it at all. It seemed to be a non-entity. Chen Ming pinched a few throwing weapons and threw them at the totem pole again. Like the first one, all the weapons could not hit this thing. It seemed that there was no means to stop it. Even after Chen Ming fired the javelin continuously and failed to hit it, the totem pole monster seemed to be enraged and rushed towards him with a large number of broken arms. Although the speed was not fast, the sense of danger that was getting closer and closer was real. Chen Ming could not help but raise his palm, and the plasma was about to be released at any time. But he suddenly stopped his hand, changed direction, and turned around to run to the periphery of the laboratory. If you are not sure what the enemy is capable of, it is best not to use the trump card directly. There happened to be some resting left path molecules outside, and they could help test what capabilities this totem pole monster has. Through monitoring, Chen Ming found that the psychic was not near the door between the deepest part of the laboratory and the outside world at this time, and seemed to be going to get something. Because the situation here in the laboratory was too crude, he was not prepared, and it might take a while to come. That's just right. Chen Ming continued to run wildly inside the laboratory. In just a dozen seconds, he rushed directly from the deepest part of the laboratory to the door leading to the periphery of the laboratory and hit the door with the remaining momentum, smashing the door directly. Broken metal and a large amount of flesh and blood tissue that had not yet completely dispersed spread to the periphery of the laboratory with Chen Ming's collision. A large number of left-handed creatures were killed instantly, and the flesh and blood of the psychic beasts that Jing had tried so hard to block were also brought out. Behind Chen Ming, the totem pole that was not very fast just now strangely maintained an extremely high speed, hanging not far behind Chen Ming. It will soon be able to step out of the innermost area of the laboratory. Chen Ming noticed that the flesh and blood of these psychic beasts seemed to have nothing to do with this totem pole monster, but simply stepped on the flesh and blood without interfering with each other. He could clearly feel that this totem pole had a psychic nature similar to that of fascination, and he didn't know what was going on. Chen Ming didn't dwell on this situation, and only after winning the fight was he worthy of dwelling on this matter. He ignored all the left-handed creatures and continued to run out of the laboratory, looking like he didn't care about anything. Some left-handed creatures tried to stop him, but Chen Ming's power was not something they could bear. Even if it was just a slight graze, Chen Ming could kill people directly like a train. And in fact, more left-handed creatures had been attracted by the existence inside the laboratory. They were bewitched by the flesh and blood of the beast of mind, and one by one they pounced on the flesh and blood that had just had a full meal. However, just when these people approached the deepest part of the laboratory, the arms of these people suddenly broke inexplicably. The incision seemed to be violently torn off by something. Chen Ming looked at the location of these people's wounds at this time, and looked at the characteristics and direction of these violently torn wounds, and came to a horrible conclusion. It was these people's arms that did not pull themselves off. The arms of the left-handed molecules fell to the ground, crawling like maggots to the body of the totem pole that was moving towards the gate, and continued to add bricks and tiles to the body of the arm link. And the consciousness of these left-handed molecules who lost their limbs suddenly became clear. They were no longer bewitched by the flesh and blood of the beast of mind, and regained consciousness. But after waking up, they saw the huge totem pole not far away, and their hands that were a little ahead of them and crawling forward. This scene was even more terrifying for them. It's even better to die in infatuation. At this moment, the left path molecules felt the dual fear from the biological instinct of the creature and from the spiritual level. No matter how much brainwashing, it didn't work at this moment. The awakened left path molecules tried desperately to escape, but the rest of their body tissues suddenly had their own consciousness. In the howling of the left path molecules, their bodies split and rotted and crawled towards the totem pole again and were sucked into the body. The psychic of the left path finally hurried over. When he saw the two faces at the top of the totem pole, he was suddenly stunned, and his expression was a little panic. Faceless. Chen Ming heard his muttering. This faceless should not be that he can't see the face of the totem pole. But he saw this face and thought of the term faceless, which is suspected to be the internal code of the left path. This totem pole monster is indeed inseparable from the left path. I just don't know what's going on with this monster. Chen Ming hadn't seen any description of this monster in any document in the space station or underground laboratory. But this thing just appeared. And Chen Ming felt that it was natural rather than something that was researched by humans. It was something that grew naturally without any human influence. Although it was formed by various human tissues, Chen Ming had this feeling when he looked at it. And there was also a familiar feeling. Chen Ming had already hidden in the corner at this time, leaving the scene to the left-way molecules to deal with. At the same time, he was desperately thinking about what made him so familiar. Such a dangerous thing. If he had an impression, he should not have forgotten it. He must remember it. Just as Chen Ming was thinking, the left-way psychic suddenly turned around and ran back the way he came. After seeing that face and the door that was completely damaged and could not be repaired, he gave up rescuing the left way of the laboratory. He wanted to escape. Although Chen Ming was thinking about things, he couldn't just let him run away. He brought the totem pole here specifically to let the psychic of Zhuojing help test what abilities this monster has, so that he can fight more easily in the next battle. How could he just let him run away? Chen Ming, who was closer to the periphery of the laboratory than the psychic of Zhuojing, directly created a small amount of plasma around him and threw it to various places in the laboratory, destroying a large number of load-bearing structures in the laboratory. In front of the psychic of Zhuojing, a ruin that completely blocked the passage was created. When the psychic of Zhuojing saw this scene, his eyes were bloodshot and the psychic fluctuations on his body were stimulated. A surging magnetic force pulled the damaged laboratory structure and forcibly tore a passage that could barely pass through the collapsed passage. The ability of this psychic is to control electromagnetic force. Chen Ming had discovered it when he was dealing with the flesh and blood of the psychic beast at the door just now. It just so happened that there were many metal structures in the laboratory, which was indeed a good place for him to play. But it was too late. Chen Ming destroyed more than a little of the laboratory structure. He had no ability to clean it up in a short time. And he didn't have time. The left path members behind him, who were also blocked by the ruins in the depths of the laboratory, were all wiped out in just a few minutes. It was impossible to survive under the dual influence of the two ferocious psychic creatures, the flesh and blood of the mind beast and the totem pole. And Chen Ming was constantly destroying the structure of the laboratory in front of him, so he could not escape at all. The next thing he could do was to face the totem pole monster directly. The left path psychic turned his head and saw the totem pole monster that was almost in front of him. He roared at the top of his lungs, and after being pushed to the extreme, he exploded to the extreme. A substantial electric light flashed across his body, and under the blessing of magnetic force, he drove a large number of messy metal weapons, and under the action of electromagnetic force, he burst out at a very fast speed and rushed towards the totem pole. Then, he disappeared. He swung a large number of metal weapons at the totem pole, but the weapons went straight through the body of the totem pole. But he, who was also close, was swallowed by the totem pole. After a short silence, Chen Ming saw that the two faces on the top of the totem pole were suddenly torn apart and pulled to the side, leaving a vacant space, and began to pull the flesh and blood tissues, forming the appearance of the left path psychic who had just been devoured. A flash of lightning suddenly flashed across the entire totem pole. The psychic fluctuations of the psychic who had just died were strengthening it. "It's bad," Chen Ming said in his heart. "How come all the psychics of Zhujiang are so weak? They died suddenly without any investigation." The black fog that assassinated him before was also like that. He seemed to have some strength at first, but he was exhausted after 2 rounds of fighting. He wanted to escape but was captured by him. The gatekeeper on the space station behind him was almost defenseless. He was killed by his sneak attack. He didn't even know what psychic power was. Now the psychic who can control electromagnetic force that I just met can only control metal. He has no other performance. Using metal to make large weapons looks very impressive, but in the end, he gave it away without understanding anything. The psychics of Zhujiang are really not good. But think about it, unless there is a compelling reason, who would go to Zhujiang if they are really good psychics? It is good news for Chen Ming that the psychics of Zhujiang are weaker than those of the Empire. But it is more troublesome at this time. This electromagnetic psychic was given away before he could even find out anything, and he also gave the totem pole a new ability. This was actually a mistake by Chen Ming. He never expected that the psychic of Zhujiang could not even resist a face-to-face encounter and died suddenly. And the way he died suddenly was very strange. It is completely unclear what ability this totem pole has. What on earth is it? Even the queen of insects cannot directly devour a complete psychic and then reproduce the psychic power of this psychic. The ability of this thing is really a bit exaggerated. If it was him who just rushed over to fight in close combat, I'm afraid that the third face on this totem pole should be in whooping. Wait, if you think so, then are the 2 faces on this totem pole the psychics that were eaten earlier? Does it also mean that there were originally 3 psychics in this underground laboratory? If there were really other psychics who were eaten earlier, then things would be wrong. It is not only a question of whether the power of this totem pole is abnormal, but also a question of why Zhujiang actually sent 5 psychics here. Let's not talk about whether Zhujiang has so many psychics. Why did Zhujiang arrange 5 psychics in this galaxy? The research content in the space station and laboratory in this place does not require Zhujiang to do this. Unless, the totem pole is also one of the research contents. However, Chen Ming rejected this idea immediately. Because he has already controlled the entire underground laboratory, although all the databases have not been read in detail, the general contents have basically been confirmed. All the research contents have nothing to do with the state of this totem pole, and this is even more so on the space station. There is no clue to prove that Zhu Jing is conducting this research. Chen Ming is now more inclined to believe that this is a new mess that Zhu Jing has made himself, rather than a leak in the laboratory that they originally wanted to do. And look at the two faces that were originally on the top of the totem pole. Although the mask faces were deliberately distorted with flesh and blood, one of the faces was obviously neutral and had a distinct sense of charm. This face gave Chen Ming a feeling of infatuation when he first saw it, which was similar to the feeling that infatuation with the spirit stone gave him. The other face was expressionless, cold and hard, and the feeling it gave him was also similar to the feeling that a certain spirit stone gave him. So the faces that Chen Ming saw now should be the embodiment of the psychic characteristics of this totem pole. The infatuation ability was already felt when he saw it. It's just that this feeling was protected by the frenzy language spirit stone, turning into the feeling of vomiting, and it overlapped with the psychic fluctuations emitted by the flesh and blood of the mind beasts around it, which were also triggered by the infatuation spirit stone, so the feeling was not obvious, but it was indeed there. And when the electromagnetic field ability grew on the new face and the totem pole was glowing with electricity, he also felt it, and it was even the most obvious ability. Then the cold face should also have its unique ability. Maybe the property that cannot be observed by non-naked equipment and cannot be touched from a physical level is brought by this face. As for the ability to eat and transform people directly, Chen Ming does not feel that it is the effect brought by the three faces. Rather, it is the ability of the totem pole itself. If this thing continues to be given the opportunity to devour psychics, then how far this thing can grow is obviously a question that people have to think about, but they don't want to happen at all. Such a thing that can directly kill even the fake body that Chen Ming spent a lot of effort to create, if it really grows up, I'm afraid that many troubles will happen. However, things are not without a turn. Because when the totem pole eats the psychic of the left path, the third face grows on the top. Chen Ming could clearly feel that the chaotic feeling of the mixed abilities of the totem pole itself became more and more obvious. It was even obvious that there was a possibility of collapse at any time. It would become more fragile when absorbing new abilities, which seemed to be its weakness. It seemed acceptable to Chen Ming to give this totem pole one more ability in exchange for discovering its weakness. However, this chaotic state close to collapse did not really cause the totem pole to collapse. It was recovering rapidly from this state of unrestricted and unconstrained psychic power. Chen Ming did not think about it anymore. He had to seize this opportunity. The plasma condensed into shape in his hand and was constrained into the shape of a spear by the strong magnetic field. Directly releasing plasma would cause the power of plasma to be dispersed, and using the magnetic field force to constrain it into some shapes, and adding some constraining materials on the outside can better exert the power of plasma. The Zerg muscles on Chen Ming's body twisted into an extremely solid block, driving the huge body power to throw out the almost materialized plasma spear. The continuous plasma explosion extended from the trajectory of Chen Ming's spear all the way to the front of the totem pole. At the moment when the plasma spear hit, it did not pass directly through as before. The small amount of Zerg keratin created by Chen Ming to restrict the plasma spear exploded at the moment of hitting. The powerful explosion directly collapsed the passage of the laboratory and buried the totem pole completely in the ruins. It can be seen that even with the restrained spear-shaped plasma, a large amount of escape will occur, reacting with the surrounding environment to cause the energy used for the main attack to decay. However, the restriction effect made by Chen Ming was not bad. At least the power of the explosion was concentrated near the totem pole. However, before he had time to be happy about the power of this spear, he heard the movement from the inside of the ruins again. All the metal structures on the collapsed laboratory ruins were pulled by a magnetic force, taking away most of the collapsed soil and rebuilding the collapsed passage, revealing the appearance of the totem pole that was almost intact. It only had some broken marks on the arms and limbs that formed part of its torso, and no other damage. Even the charming face that was hit directly by the spear did not have a single scratch left. Chen Ming's heart sank, and the plasma spear in his hand condensed again. This time, the glow of the plasma flashing on the spear he condensed was more dazzling than before. However, As a flash of light and a series of explosions flashed by, the situation was no different from before. The effect of this spear was even worse than before. His plasma could not kill this monster. And at this moment, the totem pole also adapted to the new electromagnetic force at an astonishing speed. The chaotic fluctuations on its body have disappeared, and it can even interfere with Chen Ming's release of plasma to a certain extent. Plasma is actually an effect extended from the power of the magnetic field, but it needs some additional assistance. Pure magnetic fields cannot create plasma, but as a part of the composition of plasma, magnetic fields can still be used to interfere with it. Moreover, ManhwaRecap's plasma is not psychic power, but plasma manually produced by body organs. Such an ordinary ability is already at a disadvantage compared to psychic ability. Not to mention that the two abilities are relatively close in nature. Chen Ming tried to condense the spear again, but this time, the spear was not even as bright as the first spear. After the totem pole completely mastered the electromagnetic ability, it was difficult for ManhwaRecap, the prosthesis, to effectively kill this thing. A bit troublesome. At this time, Chen Ming could still clearly feel that the chaotic psychic fluctuations belonging to the totem pole around him were constantly expanding, and the psychic fluctuations of the mind beast were almost imperceptible. His biggest enemy now is this totem pole. How to fight? How to fight such a monster that can be said to perfectly restrain ManhwaRecap? It is known that direct melee is courting death, and the ability to use plasma is also restrained to death. Even if he can directly blow up the entire laboratory, I am afraid that he can't limit this monster that also has the ability to control the magnetic field. Moreover, it was the effect that Chen Ming had just played, and it was just after it absorbed the psychic and entered a short period of chaos that it barely caused a little damage. Where can he find another psychic? Chen Ming had the answer when he thought of this question. But ManhwaRecap's prosthesis took him a lot of effort to make, and he couldn't just give ManhwaRecap away. He had to see if there were other opportunities. Chen Ming stopped fighting the totem pole and turned to retreat to the periphery of the laboratory. The totem pole immediately followed, and while constantly killing the left path molecules outside the laboratory who failed to evacuate the laboratory, it continued to advance towards Chen Ming. The totem pole did not even need to be seen by the left path molecules. As long as its psychic fluctuations spread and touched those left path molecules, their limbs would break by themselves, and the whole person would become part of the totem pole. As more and more left path molecules outside the laboratory were killed by the totem pole, the diameter and length of the totem pole had almost doubled compared to when it first appeared. If the laboratory space was not large enough, the passages between the laboratories might not be able to accommodate this size. However, since Chen Ming had tried it before and physical means were ineffective, the totem pole should actually have the ability to ignore obstacles. I just don't know why the totem pole is still tracking along the path he has walked. And as the totem pole grew in size, Chen Ming found that its speed became faster and faster, and the limbs under it obviously exerted stronger power than before, forcing Chen Ming to speed up. The direction of things is gradually developing towards a situation he doesn't want to see. Unconsciously, Chen Ming had approached the door of the inclined passage leading to the outside world in the laboratory. Without thinking much, he took another path near the door and circled back to the deepest part of the laboratory. The totem pole was obviously close to the door, but it did not take the opportunity to leave. It still followed. It looked like only one of it and Chen Ming could survive today. Although the totem pole could interfere with Chen Ming with its psychic power, it really couldn't kill Chen Ming without getting close. In other words, if Chen Ming wanted to run, he could actually leave directly and get on the spaceship, and the totem pole would not be able to track him. But Chen Ming didn't want to, and he had to solve the trouble he caused himself. Just as Chen Ming was circling around with the totem pole, thinking about what other means he had to get rid of this monster, he circled back to the place where he first entered the laboratory. And here, he suddenly found a strange place. The psychic fluctuations of the mind beast were actually being absorbed by the totem pole. This is not like the psychic beast and the dimensional infection, which is completely unrelated and even has some repulsive feeling. It is the psychic fluctuations of the totem pole that absorb and transform the psychic fluctuations of the psychic beast. Chen Ming was shocked and immediately sensed the residual mental power he had along the way. The result is terrible. The psychic fluctuations that remained during his actions, that is, the psychic fluctuations of the queen worm, were also absorbed by the totem pole. It is no wonder that the totem pole has shown a slight sense of increased physical strength during this period of tracking. It will slowly absorb the psychic fluctuations that escape from the surrounding environment, not just by eating psychics. Any psychic will gradually become a part of the totem pole in the process of fighting with the totem pole. Is this a bit scary? The more Chen Ming thought about it, the more he felt that the ability of this totem pole made it difficult for him to think of a suitable solution. And just when the totem pole absorbed more and more psychic fluctuations, Chen Ming saw that the top of the totem pole monster suddenly tore apart without any sign. A new face emerged from the crack, twisted, and formed a mask-like face within Whooping's face. The power of the Queen of Insects was usurped by it. Chen Ming felt what horror was at this moment. At this moment, the chaotic spiritual energy fluctuations on the totem pole body appeared again. Chen Ming knew that this was his only chance. All the energy of Whooping's body was used by him to convert plasma, and all the converted plasma was condensed by Chen Ming into a small ball with a diameter of only 10 centimeters in the palm of his hand. A magnificent ball of light emitting a destructive aura. The ball of light formed by excessive plasma was thrown by Chen Ming. A ray of annihilation flashed in the underground of the laboratory. A light that could blind everyone's eyes filled the entire laboratory. This time the plasma did not explode, but silently annihilated all the existences that came into contact with the light. Even Chen Ming could not see clearly what was happening to the totem pole in front of the light. After a long time, the plasma beam finally dissipated. The laboratory did not collapse. The surrounding soil and rocks that were not directly in contact with the annihilation light, but had almost been burned into glass, still supported the laboratory. The totem pole appeared in front of Chen Ming again. The plasma ball he created by exhausting almost all his energy did have an effect. The broken arms on the totem pole's trunk broke into pieces, revealing the bright red, obviously alive organs. A large number of organs fell to the ground with the appearance of the torso gap, and it seemed that Chen Ming's attack method just now did cause serious damage to the totem pole. However, Chen Ming had no time to rejoice. At the bottom of the totem pole, the arms that had worn out their fingers during the movement suddenly twitched and moved. They barely picked up the internal organs on the ground and crushed themselves to fill the wounds caused by the plasma just now. Chen Ming's face turned black, and his right hand was empty. He was already using psychic energy to transfer Zerg energy crystals to Whooping to replenish the energy just consumed. But another terrible thing happened to the totem pole. Its lost internal organs had just been stuffed in for a few seconds, and its limbs had already repaired the gap. And with the psychic fluctuations of the Queen of Insects appearing on it, the wounds recovered naturally. After all, the body-strengthening psychic energy provided by the Queen of Insects is comprehensive, and the speed of recovery from injuries is also a part of physical strength. Originally, it was a very useful psychic power for Chen Ming, but he didn't expect that it would be so disgusting to use it on a hostile existence. Chen Ming's heart had completely sunk to the bottom, but he had no intention of retreating. The psychic power of the Queen of Insects had been absorbed without Whooping being eaten, but he still had one chance. At this time, there was no living person in the entire Zwajing laboratory. All monitoring equipment was also under his control, and he could use his own psychic power at will. This was the last and only chance. If he failed, he might personally cultivate a more terrifying monster that possessed his psychic power, the psychic power of the Queen of Insects, and 3 other abilities. This consequence might not be something he could bear. But Chen Ming didn't think about it anymore at this time. He didn't want to think about what the consequences would be if this thing failed. He had to rely on instinct to fight. He did this before when he encountered desperate situations. If his instinct hadn't told him to use the word of madness spirit stone to hedge against the spiritual awakening nerve, he would have died on Zwajing's experimental table long ago. So he planned to ignore everything and just trust himself and his instincts. Just do what his instincts told him to do. Chen Ming took a deep breath and released his own spiritual energy fluctuations. The totem pole that was still chasing Chen Ming instantly sped up its movements a lot, although there was no obvious expression on its four masked faces. But Chen Ming could feel that it was craving for his spiritual energy. Chen Ming had completely emptied his brain. A huge amount of spiritual energy fluctuations dissipated inside the laboratory, and the entire laboratory was becoming his kingdom. In this process, the totem pole was desperately absorbing this unique spiritual energy that could not leave any spiritual energy fluctuations. Only 2 minutes later, the top of the totem pole was torn apart by itself again. But this time, the situation seemed a little different from the previous one. The torn flesh and blood tissue had not yet condensed a new face, but was still bleeding and losing the spiritual energy fluctuations belonging to the totem pole itself. The totem pole could not replicate Chen Ming's psychic energy, and it could not transform Chen Ming's psychic energy into a part of itself. The complexity of Chen Ming's psychic energy could not be replicated by any other creature or other existence. Suddenly, a large amount of dark organs and blood suddenly spurted out from the crack wound torn open by the totem pole itself. It was vomiting out the psychic fluctuations that belonged to Chen Ming himself. As it did so, it also fell into a weaker state than before. The psychic nature of the frenzy language spirit stone is very extreme. Although the nature of the obsession spirit stone is neutral, it is also very extreme. The totem pole also seems to be a being closely related to extremes. But obviously, the nature of Chen Ming's psychic fluctuations is the most extreme. At this moment, the dark beast with a gorgeous luster suddenly appeared in front of the weak totem pole. Instinct told Chen Ming that the totem pole at this moment no longer had the ability to kill him directly. The luster on his body was the plasma with the highest concentration naturally dissipated under the continuous supply of energy crystals from Chen Ming. Chen Ming could no longer restrain the luster. Chen Ming jumped up and jumped to the top of the totem pole. His clenched right fist rushed directly into the crack at the top of the totem pole. "Do you like to eat?" Chen Ming loosened his clenched right hand, and a pure white light ball with a starry sky inside was stuffed into the body of the totem pole. At this moment, Chen Ming felt danger again. It was not the danger from the totem pole, but the danger from the plasma he had just created. In the sharp stinging feeling, Chen Ming immediately ran away from the totem pole and hid deeper underground, relying on the top-digging ability of the Zerg unit. However, he didn't have time to hide in a place where there was no sense of danger. He suddenly heard a tinnitus in his ears, coming from ManhwaRecap's prosthesis, whose physical fitness could withstand large weapons. At this moment, ManhwaRecap had no way to collect any effective information. It can only be confirmed that ManhwaRecap is still alive. Although hiding in advance did not completely get rid of the range of plasma, it was still useful. So Chen Ming could only try to confirm the situation through the monitoring around the laboratory. However, looking back now, everything in the laboratory seemed to have failed. Chen Ming could only look further ahead and try to use the equipment of the Ecological Observation Space Station to observe the situation on the planet. But soon, Chen Ming found that he didn't need to use the equipment on the space station. Because now, the star-like light on the surface of the planet can be seen with the naked eye. The explosion of this terrifying plasma can be observed on the space station. Prev is identical to table of contents. Google next. About us contact us DMA cookie policy privacy policy terms of use. The images of the ordinary monitoring facilities outside the Ecological Observation Space Station have all been attracted by the light of the microstar on the planet. After all, this is the result of highly concentrated plasma in a closed underground environment. The violent reaction is just like when Chen Ming stuffed the metal giant of Yan Xiong with explosives. The explosives at that time directly blew Yan Xiong to complete disability. And this time, the totem pole was also completely killed. Everything is being wiped out within the range of the annihilation light. Whether it is the spiritual beast or the spiritual energy fluctuations of the totem pole, all of them are completely disappeared under this powerful explosion. Chen Ming can no longer feel any spiritual energy fluctuations at this time. Psychic energy looks and sounds very metaphysical, but even metaphysical things can be eliminated by physical means. If it can't be eliminated, It means that the caliber is not enough and the power is not enough. If the intensity of the plasma created by Chen Ming this time is not enough, then Chen Ming can of course do it again with a higher intensity, but there is no need for it now. I have to say that this totem pole is really a monster. Without actively feeding this guy with psychic energy, Chen Ming might have to resort to some tricks to deal with it in person. No, if he came in person, he should have used Stardust's meteorite to wash the ground directly, or at least the tachyon spear to wash the ground, and he would not have come into direct contact with the totem pole. That is to say, ManhwaRecap was designed from the beginning as a special combat unit specifically for ground combat. It is normal to be evenly matched when encountering a similarly special ground unit, and a guy who can be said to restrain ManhwaRecap in all aspects of ability. Different environments and situations are different, and they cannot be generalized. But at least Chen Ming won, and he won without leaving any traces of himself. So far, Zhuojing's troubles have been completely cleared. And around, the dazzling white light finally dissipated after nearly half a minute. Chen Ming finally barely saw the surrounding environment clearly. He was lying at the bottom of an area that was no longer a pit, but could be regarded as a small-scale basin, and the laboratory had been completely destroyed. The surrounding soil and rocks have all formed a large amount of silicon dioxide under the action of a huge amount of plasma, making the entire small basin look crystallized. Although Chen Ming could not see all the environments farther away due to the smoke produced by various high temperatures, and did not know the specific size of this small basin. But judging from the plasma explosion that could be observed on the space station just now, the environmental damage caused by this would definitely not be small. It was also fortunate that Chen Ming controlled ManhwaRecap to run underground quickly, otherwise he would definitely have to suffer a wave of his own ruthless moves. But at least he didn't suffer now, and the problem was solved. Chen Ming suddenly relaxed and breathed a sigh of relief, sitting up from a lying position. However, at the moment he did this, he suddenly felt a subtle chaotic psychic fluctuation from nearby. Chen Ming's expression was directly tense, and the energy that was gradually recovering acted on the organ that produced plasma again, ready to launch another powerful attack at any time. But fortunately, the situation was not so bad, and it was not the totem pole that emitted psychic fluctuations. The totem pole was really dead. The thing that was actually emitting psychic fluctuations was a thing about the size of a human hand that was not far from Chen Ming's current position. It was so hot that people could not see its specific appearance in the high-temperature smoke. Chen Ming got up from the ground and slowly walked towards the direction of the source of the psychic fluctuations. When he got closer, he also saw the source of the psychic fluctuations clearly. At the moment when the plasma exploded, there was a similar crystalline thing at the location of the totem pole, or the location of the corpse. Its shape was just an orthodox totem pole. What is it? Chen Ming picked up this miniature crystalline totem pole with curiosity and held it in his hand. This thing gave him a special feeling. Although it looks similar to the spirit stone in appearance, its properties are completely different from the spirit stone. The psychic properties of the spirit stone will directly affect the outside world and its contacts, and the psychic fluctuations of this thing are very restrained. Even if Chen Ming holds it directly now, he can only feel the psychic fluctuations inside. Moreover, he could sense that the interior of this crystal totem pole contained many abilities possessed by the totem pole monsters, waiting for someone to trigger them. The triggering method was also very simple and only required the use of psychic fluctuations to dispatch them. This was the nature of this micro-crystal totem pole that Chen Ming analyzed through simple contact. He was happy to try this thing, even though it was somewhat dangerous. But since the danger in the danger perception was not fatal, and he had even killed the totem pole, the remaining things on the totem pole could no longer pose any threat to him. Then he couldn't just get the thing and not give it a try. The psychic fluctuations on Chen Ming's body were stimulated. Various psychic fluctuations from the crystal totem pole were entangled in his hands at the same time, which was a bit chaotic, but in the chaos, they were intertwined in a unique order. The four most obvious psychic fluctuations among these psychic fluctuations were the psychic fluctuations representing the four faces of the totem pole. And the strongest of these four psychic fluctuations was naturally the psychic effect of infatuation represented by the charming face. Chen Ming felt that this should be a manifestation of the infatuation characteristics of the infatuated spirit stone. It is very likely that the psychic fluctuations of the mind beast created by the infatuated spirit stone were extracted by the totem pole and transformed into a kind of psychic effect. Of course, it is not ruled out that it was directly obtained from the spirit stone. The second strongest one was represented by the other cold face at the tip of the totem pole, a trait that Chen Ming felt was similar to ruthlessness. The effect of this ruthless nature is quite special. It can prevent the special user of ruthlessness from being disturbed by most emotions, and at the same time, it will cause direct mental damage to the enemy when hurting the enemy. The source of such an effect should not be a psychic, but a spirit stone similar to the obsessed spirit stone, or a psychic weapon with the same properties. Then there is the psychic fluctuations of the psychic who has the psychic power to control electromagnetic force absorbed by the totem pole. Finally, there is the psychic fluctuations belonging to the queen of insects that have just been absorbed. After being absorbed by the totem pole, Chen Ming's own psychic fluctuations were not imitated, but instead caused it to be reversely damaged by the psychic fluctuations, causing it to spit out, so it did not show on this crystal totem pole. So the four conspicuous psychic fluctuations on this totem pole are the four abilities that have already taken shape on the totem pole. Other inconspicuous psychic fluctuations do exist, namely the two abilities of virtualization and swallowing. However, the obvious abilities of the first four psychic fluctuations have nothing to do with the virtualization and swallowing abilities that Chen Ming observed on the totem pole. To put it in a more appropriate way, these four abilities all have a feeling of being mixed in and blended in. The only abilities that truly belong to this crystal are virtualization and swallowing. Chen Ming could clearly feel that the ability to dematerialize was the most basic psychic fluctuation that maintained the existence of the totem pole crystal. Although this psychic fluctuation was very basic and weak, and was not noticeable under the external manifestations of various other abilities, it was indeed a true dematerialization ability, with the effect of dematerializing an individual from the real world. This should be derived from the ability of a psychic. It's just that the ability of this psychic seems not very good, and can only dematerialize from the records of various devices, but not from the naked eye or directly from the real world. And from the nature of this psychic power for the totem pole crystal, it should be that this dematerialized psychic has transformed into the totem pole monster for some reason. The psychic is a body, and his psychic power has become the cornerstone of multiple psychic qualities. So this monster has the ability to dematerialize. The ability to devour psychic fluctuations and transform them into one's own psychic power should be the ability of this totem pole after the psychic has transformed. This idea is the most logically consistent. As for why the totem pole has such an ability, how did this ability come from? Chen Ming didn't know. However, he had some guesses about the reason why the psychic turned into a totem pole. Anyway, it must be related to the originally mixed psychic fluctuations. Chen Ming's mind also remembered the words that the boss said some time ago. It was the words that warned him not to use weapons and equipment made of materials with different psychic properties at the same time. The boss didn't make it clear before, but Chen Ming has now seen the consequences of doing so with his own eyes. No wonder he said at the time that the consequences would be worse, and that it would be involved with more in-depth knowledge of psychic powers. It is indeed involved. And if he himself encountered this situation and he became such a monster, then the trouble of dealing with it. Chen Ming was a little afraid to think about it. He could ask the boss later to confirm more specific information that he couldn't analyze. Anyway, he has experienced it personally and understood the nature of this thing, so it won't be a problem to ask some standardized terms. This kind of thing is really troublesome in many ways. At least from Chen Ming's personal experience, it is more troublesome than dimensional infection. This kind of thing should be replicable like dimensional infection and psychic beast. He doesn't want to be completely clueless if he encounters it again in the future. Asking won't save any money. Speaking of which, since not all the faces of the totem pole are psychics, it means that Zhu Jing has deployed 4 psychics here. A psychic who was guarding the gate of the space station and was killed by Chen Ming with one punch, and Chen Ming didn't know what ability he had, and a psychic who came to confirm the dimensional infection status of the space station and was knocked unconscious by Chen Ming. an electromagnetic psychic who was guarding the gate of the underground laboratory, and a virtual psychic who was accompanying the Psychic Beast project in the core area of the underground laboratory. Exactly 4. This number is quite outrageous. Although there is one less than Chen Ming's previous guess, the fact that a bunch of psychics were deployed is certain. Chen Ming himself has not seen too many psychics, at most the boss, the president, Hu Yi, Yin Xiong, Xiao Yang, and He Gu, and he has no impression of other psychics not from Zhuojing. However, the number of Zhuojing psychics is comparable to that of these other forces, which is very wrong. How many psychics are hidden in Zhuojing? Why do they have so many psychics? Of course, it is also possible that Zhuojing gathered all the psychics under their power and distributed throughout the empire together under the arrangement of Zhuojing's top leaders, and they were killed by Chen Ming in one place, so Chen Ming felt that there were too many. After all, Chen Ming had never heard of any dimensional infection incident related to Zhuojing, and there had never been any information related to the Mind Beast plan. This galaxy is probably a relatively important galaxy for Zhuojing, and it has important plans. Under this premise, there are so many psychics to escort it. It is also possible that it is precisely because the plan here is relatively important that some important people related to Zhuojing are involved. So when something happens, Zhuojing's top leaders will think about solving this place first. Chen Ming's guess is also supported by evidence. He found not only clues to the Kamo Star region in the database, but also many other clues belonging to people related to Zhuojing. There should be some big fish in it. Although there is no clear and direct record of content related to people in the database. But if you want to find it, you can still find a lot of evidence that is enough to completely clarify the identity of the person. But Chen Ming doesn't have so much time to find these people one by one. So he chose a way that would cause the greatest harm to Zhuojing and was also the simplest. Give this information to the Empire. The Empire will naturally eliminate all of Zhuojing at lightning speed while trying to maintain stability and not touching Zhuojing's nerves. The Empire is about to go to war with the mechanical clan again, and any internal unstable factors will be eliminated before the war officially begins. Chen Ming doesn't need to worry about any mistakes in the middle. After all, the dimensional infection here in the space station will definitely attract important people to come here, and such people don't have to worry about being infiltrated by Zhuojing. If Zhuojing could really infiltrate people of this level, the Empire should have collapsed long ago. At the same time, Chen Ming doesn't need to worry about the issue of merit. He still has some confidence in the Empire. At least the Empire will not be harsh on those who have contributed to the Empire, and the various restrictions on psychics are also very relaxed. Even if he used Whooping's identity to directly give away this information for free, some of the merits brought by this information will definitely be attributed to Whooping. In the future, if Whooping has the opportunity to get away with it after dealing with another dimensional infection caused by Zhuojing, then these merits will still be of some use. In addition, Chen Ming does not need to worry about the problem of his identity being exposed because he has obtained too much information. Now that the underground laboratory has been blown up, all the contents of the database have been transferred to the database of the space station by him. And the space station has been fully controlled by his psychic power. So whether this space station has data exchanged with the underground laboratory is no longer something that anyone except Chen Ming can determine. Under this premise, there is no trace of Chen Ming himself. Even Zhuojing can only think that Whooping stole the data in the database, and it has absolutely nothing to do with Chen Ming. After confirming that he did not leave any traces or handles, Chen Ming returned his attention to the totem pole crystal in his hand. The various psychic fluctuations emitted by this thing after being guided by psychic power are not just for people to see. With the help of the crystal, he can completely mobilize the psychic fluctuations in it and make these psychic fluctuations produce the effects they should have. Just like the Zerg core that Chen Ming made himself to solidify the psychic energy of the Queen. At the same time, it is also similar to the relics such as the Purgatory core left by another civilization. Chen Ming even suspected that the structure of another civilization was actually imitated by referring to the things left after the death of this kind of creature with mixed psychic characteristics. As long as there is a supply of psychic energy, the crystal can continuously convert psychic fluctuations into psychic fluctuations in the crystal. Infatuation, ruthlessness, electromagnetic force, and even the psychic energy of the queen and the virtual psychic energy can all be directly called. Only the ability of swallowing and transforming belongs to the totem pole. Even if it becomes a crystal, only the totem pole crystal can use it to integrate more spiritual energies of different properties into this small crystal. Chen Ming can feel that this thing still has a strong tolerance. He can continue to swallow more spiritual energy fluctuations, restrain them, and become part of the spiritual energy of this totem pole crystal for Chen Ming to drive. To be honest, Chen Ming even wanted to try to put his spiritual energy fluctuations into this thing, but Chen Ming felt that it might explode, so forget it. In short, although the spiritual energy of obsession, ruthlessness, and queen worms of this totem pole crystal is not very meaningful to Chen Ming, the effect is single and may only be useful sometimes. But the controllability of virtualization and electromagnetic force is very interesting. The effect of virtualization can ignore many levels of attacks. If the totem pole does not become fragile when absorbing new spiritual energy fluctuations, Chen Ming does not know how to fight. The ability of electromagnetic force is even more interesting because of the existence of magnetic field. Magnetic field is not a very big concept, but a concept that can be put on a very small level. For example, every cell of every organism will generate a magnetic field due to bioelectric movement. Although the magnetic field is only a manifestation of the survival activities of organisms. But if there is spiritual power, the situation is different. Chen Ming can use this electromagnetic spiritual power to use the magnetic field to affect the bioelectric movement in turn, and then affect every cell in the body, so that the body tissue can exert more powerful power. If the magnetic field ability is to be developed, the intensity is definitely not low. It is only used to control a large range of electromagnetic forces. Using electromagnetic forces to manipulate metals is indeed a development direction. But for Chen Ming's fake body, developing the power of biological magnetic fields is the most correct choice. Moreover, plasma is also an effect extended from the power of magnetic fields. This ability is obviously very suitable for unwhooping. It can only be said that the effect of spiritual power development of this left-handed psychic is not good. Chen Ming only saw the control of metals from him. Other microscopic biological magnetic field control and macroscopic interference with large-scale magnetic field environment Chen Ming did not see any. It seems that none of the psychics in Zhuojing are very good at developing psychic energy. It's a pity to waste such a good ability. No, don't feel sorry for it. If someone doesn't cherish this power, he will help to collect it. Of course, this totem pole crystal obviously has its shortcomings. The final fate of the psychic with the ability of virtualization is the biggest shortcoming. Chen Ming can clearly feel from the crystal that the psychic fluctuations inside are a very chaotic existence after they are gathered together. This thing is likely to be a time bomb, the kind that kills all those who come into contact with it, a bit like walking on a tightrope. But it is just right for Chen Ming, who can use a prosthesis. There is no need to worry about problems when using the prosthesis, and the prosthesis has danger perception, which can predict the time when this thing explodes in advance. But you still can't really invest too much in time bombs. Just treat it as a consumable. You can try to use, research, and develop it, but you must not put all your eggs in this basket. After Chen Ming confirmed his idea, he put away the totem pole crystal. Walking all the way, he came to the edge of the miniature basin he created by himself. The spaceship that had imprisoned Zhuojing's psychic has arrived here. But before boarding the spaceship, Chen Ming actually didn't quite understand one thing. He stood in front of the hatch of the spaceship and turned out the records in the database. According to the information he learned from the database, Zhuojing didn't actually intend to leak both the psychic beast and the dimensional infection at the beginning. They also have a plan. It is to use the byproduct of the psychic beast plan, the psychic beast with the fascination trait, to create some people infected with the fascination trait, but it will not be fatal, and it will not cause the Lin trait to be discovered. Rely on them to attract a large number of outsiders to arrive on this planet and conduct large-scale human experiments. And Yi Lirong from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism is one of the facilitators of this plan. The plan in the database can be said to be well organized. But Yi Lirong died, and died at the hands of his own people. Chen Ming thought about it carefully at this time, and it didn't seem to be too incomprehensible. Anyway, for Jing, the experimental data must have been transmitted to other places, and the Mind Beast project should have entered the final stage. It is also possible to conduct large-scale human experiments in other places. Here, we still need to wait for the development of tourism. Isn't this a waste of time? Using tourist planets to attract large-scale people consumes a lot of time. Although it is more difficult to directly find a planet with a large population, it is obviously faster in terms of efficiency. Perhaps, in the near future, Jing will put the byproduct of the Mind Beast project somewhere in the Empire. And this should not be possible, but certain. Chen Ming thought for a while, specially marked this document in the database, and wrote his own opinion. Then he boarded the spaceship and prepared to leave. When he boarded the spaceship, he also formally learned the name of the totem pole crystal origin of chaos. Next, what Chen Ming has to do is to follow the clues and go to the Kamo Star region. If you walk honestly in hyperspace, it will take 2 weeks to cover the bag, which is still quite far. Chen Ming can just find an opportunity on the way to adapt to the ability to use the source of chaos. By the way, use the prosthesis to experience the prosperity of the prosperous star region.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.